Good evening, traveller. Today's topic is very interesting and unusual. We are talking about Leshy. Who is he really? A scary elder fiend who lives in the forest and lures people into traps? Or is he just a protector of the forest who guards his forest and his friends? Today we will go into his forest and find out. But before that, please support me with a like and a subscription. I will be grateful. Well, let's get started. All forest beginnings are quieter than memory will admit. Resin and damp leaf hang in the air, and the ground gives back a sound like breathing when a foot settles on it. Dawn is pale ash along the horizon. Ravens stitch the seam with slow black thread. In that hour the line between path and vein grows thin, and travellers feel an old attention upon them, patient, appraising, not unkind. In our village the elders say that attention has a keeper, and they lower their voices when the wind leans at the door. We name him in a hush that is not fear so much as etiquette. Leshy. Some claim he is a monster, ancient as the first fright, towering, booming, greedy for tricks. Others lift their caps to the trey line as if before a chapel. To them he is a guardian who gathers storms in his cloak and keeps living embers safe from cruel hands. Both tales circle the same route. It is the route of thresholds, where animals hold parliament and mushrooms lay down decrees for those who read their punctuation. If he is cruel, cruelty has been brought to him. If he is kind, kindness has been kept with him. The forest remembers, and he is its way of remembering aloud. Long before roads learned to stay straight, before iron forgot the patience of ore, the Leshy walked the border between what breathes openly and what breathes in secret. He is not king but memory, not judge but mirror. He repeats the forest to itself so it will not break under rumours of axes. A buck hears in him the leap that first cleared fire. A hawk hears the spiral that taught it sky. A nettle hears the thunder of seeds waking. Men hear what they have earned to hear, and sometimes they hear their own hearts running in frightened circles and blame him for the dust. In our village, ovens cool and warm with the patience of planets. Children learn seasons by the taste of smoke and the mood of the pump handle. Among them lives a woodcutter's son whose name fits him the way dawn fits a field. Mirko, curious like clean water meeting a culvert and wanting to try its throat. He carries questions as others carry knives, and he sharpens them by listening at his grandmother's skirts. She speaks of wolf feasts where men are guests, of willow women whose fingers can untie grief and braid it into laughter. In each tale the trees nod, as if they were there. His father measures trees the way a priest measures silence, marking those that can be taken without the hill forgetting itself. His law is plain: never cut what shelters a nest, never cut where springs speak, never cut when the sun hangs balanced as a coin. Mirko nods, yet the bright edge of his mind tugs toward deeper green. On a morning when frost writes its quick script and melts before it can be read twice, he loops a red thread round his wrist, tucks bread and salt into his satchel, and shoulders a dull axe whose weight he promises to carry more than use. The forest accepts him as a guest, but does not announce it. Alder leaves tremble with their usual gossip. A hare writes a white interruption across the shade. Bees chant low hymns about distances. Mirko walks until he reaches a grove where light collects like clear soup in a wooden bowl. He sets down the axe as one sets down an argument that may yet be needed. He breaks the bread and salts a stump. He remembers his grandmother's counsel: speak less with the mouth, more with the breath. Then he waits, because waiting is how one knocks at a door you cannot see. Coolth folds over him like a shawl dipped in river water. Birdsong thins as if drawn through a comb. The grove grows attentive, and Mirko does not turn, though the hairs along his arms rise one by one like villagers lighting lamps. A presence arranges itself within the weave of air, altering nothing yet explaining everything. Resin sharpens, somewhere a pine lets fall a tear that hardens without touching earth. In the marrow of the quiet, he feels a question placed in his chest rather than upon his ear. What do you seek? His answer rises as vow rather than speech. Your right name. Patience approves and deepens. Mirko thinks of the two faces of the stories: the trickster who turns pride in circles until the swamp claims it, and the keeper who turns hunters back when hunger grows cruel. Perhaps both are true as dawn and dusk are true, not contradictions but hinges. Perhaps the Leshy lures only what refuses to listen, and guides only what asks permission. To a scoffer, any path is a labyrinth. To a pilgrim, even a labyrinth is a liturgy. His breath steadies until it has the rhythm of needles falling. A slow arithmetic the forest loves. The presence moves, a boundary softens. He sees, not with eyes, a figure whose coat is bark when bark is needed, and wind when wind is kinder, whose hair makes a nest when birds are cold, whose hands are sometimes hooves and sometimes roots, always the right answer to the moment. Eye meets eye. The gaze is not a net but a clearing. In it his pride sits down and loosens its boots. His fear stands, stretches, and remembers being tall. On the stump lies, where no hand placed it, a green braid of moss, slick with dew, braided in the village pattern a promise uses when it wishes to be believed. Mirko understands a meeting has occurred, and has left no wound. He lifts the axe the way one lifts a sleeping child, gently, not to wake it, and binds the moss to the haft. He will carry the tool home unchanged. Behind him the grove seals like a mouth that has told a secret, and now keeps it, deeper in, where spruce make their gloaming even at noon. A shape not counted by any census watches the red thread, and the modest set of his shoulders. A small decision is made. Far from all roads, a path that had not existed wakes like a vein finding its pulse. The forest has accepted a witness. The Leshy has accepted a task. All that day the village moved through its chores, unaware that a new thread had been drawn into the forest's weaving. Mirko felt it in the angle of light on his palms, and in how the pump handle rose to meet his hand as if the well remembered him. He laid the axe above the door with the moss braid tied neat against the grain, and the house went quiet like snowfall again. Night brought rings within rings. He dreamed seasons gearing the world forward, a child running the inner bark while the bark breathed. He woke with resin on his tongue, and the sense that the waking did not belong to him alone. Outside, frost withdrew, and grey walked into blue. Somewhere in that grey the Leshy's task also woke, a change in pressure, weather deciding to turn. No proclamation announced it. The forest does not run on trumpets. To the north a hunger sniffed along the roots, wearing a man's shape and a coat lined with more pockets than a conscience should need. He traded answers that worked like debts, learned herb names as passwords, spirit names as fences. In his mouth the forest's syllables sounded like prices. Forests forgive much and correct the rest with patience, but patience is not passage. The Leshy had watched those pockets wink open like little mouths, swallowing rare roots and feathers left after sacred molt, and he had watched the man's shadow move like a hook across the understory. A decision made in spruce dimness stretched outward. The guardian would test the man where greed walked like a candle in dry straw. The trickster would test the boy where innocence can bruise into wisdom without break. Work called a windfall poplar to be quartered and stacked so its rings could cool into usefulness. Father and son entered the wood together, the way one enters a thought that might fill an afternoon. Near the grove where the moss had become a promise, the air altered the way a string changes pitch. His father paused, tipped his hat, then chose another path without remark. Some borders are honoured by men who have never learned their names. At night the task came closer. In a birch stand keeping winter's posture, the peddler Borislav cut a ring of bark from a sapling to make a leash for a thing that should never be leashed. Trees bleed slowly and do not shout. The sap spoke in a sugar whisper that travelled farther than any cry. The Leshy heard it as one hears a change in one's own pulse. He arrived by being what the space required. The stand became an attention. The man's compass spun and fixed on the wrong north. The pockets' mouths tightened and would not accept more. The wound wrinkled into a scar within the hour, and there a small handprint shone as if a child of trees had pressed gratitude outward. Borislav swore by gods he had never properly met and pushed deeper, angry at mysteries that refused to translate into coin. Distance widened around his steps the way a lake widens under thaw. Elsewhere the boy slept with his hand over the moss braid as if to keep a promise from catching cold. He dreamed of a bracken gate and an animal shaped like silence stepping carefully so as not to bruise mushrooms. He walked beside it, and their shadows plaited. He woke to rye scent and a thread that looked brighter for having been seen by an old eye. He took bread and salt. The axe rode his shoulder as a sleeping child rides the road to market. At the gate he paused, not for permission, which had been granted in the grove, but to let the day understand what he wished to ask of it. The day, polite, stilled its birds long enough to be sure it had heard. Then he stepped into the path that had woken like a vein. The forest received him with the dignity of old hosts. Birch yielded to spruce, spruce to pine, pine to an elder he could not name, whose bark held constellations of amber like time caught mid-thaw. Somewhere ahead, a pocket snapped shut with the sound of a snare. Somewhere else, patient displeasure flowed like a cold river cutting a new bed. Mirko listened the way a deer listens when snow considers falling. Between two firs, a clearing opened like a held breath. At its centre stood the sapling with its healing scar and bright handprint. Morning on milk, Pride rose and took a step. He laid a hand upon its shoulder and asked it kindly to sit. He set bread on a stump, touched salt to his tongue, and spoke with breath rather than mouth. He did not beg for power. He offered measure. If you need a messenger who can walk between red thread and green vow, I can carry words without tearing them. A twig broke. In a way, a twig does not break without intention. Between the trunks, a shape assembled from shade and bark, and the thoughtful arrangement of antlers. The gaze that had cleared him yesterday found him again and finished the clearing. In that quiet, the question arrived as before, placed beneath his ribs. What do you seek? He let the answer stand, not conquest, not safety, bought with harm, only the right name for what is happening, and a way to serve it. The path that had been sleeping opened its eye again. From the far side of the clearing a draught wandered in that smelled of pockets and of the sawdust men, leave in their chests when they refuse to grieve what they break. Mirko steadied his breath until it matched the arithmetic of needles falling. Boy, guardian, hunger. Each took one quiet step. The forest's pulse lifted almost invisibly, like a bird's before leaving the branch, and the old world leaned a fraction to listen. The forest leaned, and Mirko felt the lean within himself, as if the world wished to balance its weight across his shoulders. Ahead, a gust carried the odour of strange oils, of dried beetles ground into powders, of roots pulled before their prayers were finished. Borislav moved through the trees with haste and irritation, swiping at branches that would not yield, muttering at shadows that seemed to turn his own words back into his ears. His pockets bulged, but their mouths gnawed and twitched like creatures half-starved, dissatisfied with their plunder. The Leshy's gaze fell upon both the boy, steadying his breath to match the pine's arithmetic, and the trader whose greed walked louder than his boots. It was not rage that stirred within the forest keeper, but something older, something like the still water behind a dam, gathering the strength of patience until patience must spill. Trickster or guardian, he wore both cloaks and both whispered the same truth. Balance had tilted and the woods were calling for its weight to be set right. Mirko stepped lightly into the clearing, eyes lowered in respect yet open enough to notice the pale shimmer of sap where the scar still glowed on the sapling. The handprint pulsed faintly, as if echoing the rhythm of his own pulse, tethering him to this moment. He whispered without sound, only thought and breath. I see the wound. I will not let it widen. The Leshy's form shifted in reply, a ripple of bark softening into skin, a face lined like tree rings, eyes holding both storm and meadow. Borislav burst through the opposite thicket, cursing at brambles that clung to his coat as if they had chosen him for their burden. His eyes found Mirko, then darted to the figure beyond, and for a breath he faltered. Some tales had brushed his ear before, of the one who could turn a traveller in circles until his footprints became a cage, of the one who hid wolves in his pockets as guardians. Yet pride that has fed too long on gain does not easily bow. He spat into the moss, a sign of contempt, and demanded the forest yield more. The air thickened. Every leaf seemed to hold its breath. The Leshy did not move with haste, for haste was the habit of mortals. Instead, the path beneath Borislav's feet shifted, subtle as a sigh, turning each step half aside from where he wished to go. The man's curses grew sharper, his face wet with sweat, as the forest calmly rewove his direction. He marched in circles without knowing, returning again to the scarred sapling, though he swore he had pressed deeper. Mirko watched, heart aching at the futility of the man's rage. Was this the monster the villagers feared, a being who twisted men from their course until despair claimed them? Or was it a mirror of consequence, showing greed the endless corridor it builds for itself? The boy could not answer fully, yet in his chest both truths pulsed together, refusing to part. Borislav drew a blade from his belt, its edge dull with neglect, but still eager for harm. He slashed at the air, at branches, at shadows he thought mocked him. The sapling quivered, though no steel had touched it, and Mirko stepped forward with instinct more than plan. He raised the axe not to strike, but to set its weight firm in the soil, handle upright, blade sunk into earth. The moss braid shimmered faintly. He offered it as a marker of boundary, as a plea to hold violence from spilling further. The Leshy's shape darkened, stretching until his antlers brushed unseen stars. His voice was not spoken, but trembled through bark and bone alike. What you carry into yourself. Borislav froze, though his fist still clenched the knife. He looked at the boy, then at the figure looming with both dread and awe, and his breath came ragged as though he had run miles, though he had taken only steps. His pockets sagged heavy, but when he thrust his hand within them, he found not roots, not feathers, but ash that slipped away like time lost. He cried out, stumbling backward, yet each retreat returned him to the clearing. Panic sharpened his face into something brittle. Mirko wished to speak, to offer him release, but words lodged like stones. It was not his place to decide, only to witness. The Leshy's gaze softened toward the boy, reminding him silently that witnessing too is part of keeping balance. The trader fell to his knees, clutching the empty fabric that had once held the forest's stolen life. He shouted that he had been tricked, that curses bound him, that demons mocked him. Yet the only sound that answered was the slow groan of trees remembering his theft. His knife slipped from his hand, swallowed in moss as if the earth itself disdained its touch. Mirko closed his eyes and breathed as he had in the grove, offering steadiness to a world that quivered with judgment. He did not know whether mercy or punishment would follow, only that the forest's keeper acted not from whim but from the deep order of things. When he opened his eyes, Borislav was gone. Not dead, not alive, but vanished into a path that curved away like smoke, unseen by any but the Leshy. The clearing hushed again. The scar on the sapling shone brighter, healing faster now, as though gratitude had hastened its work. The Leshy regarded Mirko with the solemn stillness of rivers under ice, and in that silence the boy understood that he had been allowed to witness both the cruelty feared in tales and the guardianship honoured in prayer. They were not separate beings, but one, a spirit answering each heart as it deserved. Wind stirred, carrying the smell of pine and thaw. The figure melted back into shadow, leaving Mirko alone with the axe rooted in soil, the moss braid catching dew like jewels. He knew he would return home, changed, though no one might notice at first. For the forest had opened a secret to him, and secrets of that depth never remain idle. As he reached for the axe to lift it again, the path ahead rearranged itself softly, beckoning. It led not back toward the village, but deeper, where songs older than memory rustled among the trees, waiting for an ear willing to hear. The path that beckoned was not the worn road of hunters, nor the cart ruts of merchants. It was narrow, hushed, almost secret, and yet it seemed to wait for Mirko as though he had always belonged to its turning. He lifted the axe from the earth with both hands, the moss braid cool and damp against his skin, and felt the weight settle into him not as burden but as bond. The air shifted as he stepped forward. A subtle warmth lingered in his chest, as though the Leshy had placed within him a spark of his endless patience. The deeper wood greeted him with stillness. Pines closed their ranks above, weaving shadows as thick as woven cloth. Ferns arched like green fountains, their fronds trembling with unspoken messages. Each step pressed into soil that felt less like ground and more like memory. Mirko sensed he was walking not into distance but into depth, as if the world folded inward to reveal its hidden marrow. His heart quickened, though not with fear, more with the awe of a guest who realizes the house he enters is alive. He came upon a hollow ringed by stones, each flecked with moss and lichens that shone faintly, like stars fallen to earth. In the center grew a tree unlike any he had seen. Its trunk spiraled as though two had twined together in an eternal embrace. Branches stretched in opposing directions, one side heavy with leaves that glowed silver in shade, the other bare and skeletal, etched with veins of fire that pulsed dimly. The tree seemed to breathe, each sway of its crown inhaling and exhaling centuries. Here the presence thickened. Mirko knew without turning that the Leshy was near, woven into bark and air alike. He sank to his knees and touched the soil, feeling the hum of something vast and deliberate beneath his fingers. The handprint scar upon the sapling had been a whisper. This was a voice resonant and ancient. It asked nothing aloud, but the boy's spirit caught the weight of its question. Can you carry what you have chosen to see? Mirko bowed his head. He did not answer with pride. He thought of his father's careful hands, of his grandmother's stories, of the wounded sapling healed by unseen tenderness. He thought of Borislav vanishing down a path of his own making, trapped not by cruelty but by consequence. He thought of his own trembling, which had stilled when he matched his breath to falling needles. At last he whispered, "I will carry it, though I am small." The branches rustled without wind. From their sound, a form began to take shape. The Leshy emerged as a figure tall as the tree, cloaked in bark that rippled into fur, hair tumbling like moss torn from stones, eyes glowing with both dawn and dusk. He was not monstrous nor comforting, but vast, too large to be caught in a single meaning. Trickster lingered in his crooked smile, guardian in the steadiness of his stance, both truths folded into him, as naturally as root and branch belonged to one trunk. He bent, bringing his gaze level with the boys. Mirko felt the weight of that attention press against him like the quiet of a cathedral. Yet within it was not only judgment, there was recognition, as if the forest itself acknowledged the red thread around his wrist, the bread he had offered. The axe made boundary, not weapon. The Leshy extended a hand, long-fingered, shifting between bark and flesh. In its palm lay a seed, small and black as coal. Mirko hesitated. The seed pulsed faintly, like a sleeping heart. He reached out, and when his skin touched its surface he felt a current race into him, images of rivers curving through stone, deer bowing antlered heads, owls turning their silent faces. He saw spirits that stalked with malice at the edges of the trees, shadows that sought to poison springs and twist saplings into snares. He saw the Leshy facing them, not with sword or flame but with patience, with cunning, with the authority of belonging. Guardian, yes, but a guardian who could wound when wounding was required to defend the deeper harmony. When Mirko lifted his eyes, the Leshy's gaze held him steady. "Plant it," the voice whispered without sound, vibrating through leaf and marrow. The boy rose, found a hollow at the base of the spiraled tree, and pressed the seed into soil still damp from last night's frost. As he covered it, the earth seemed to sigh. A faint green glow seeped from beneath his fingers, then faded, leaving only the hum of potential. The Leshy straightened. His shadow reached across the clearing like a second canopy. Mirko thought he felt approval, though it was wrapped in something sterner, as though the gift came with unseen cost. The boy stood silent, not daring to ask, knowing some answers must ripen in their own seasons. Around them, twilight began to gather. Though the sun still hung high, colours deepened, moss richer, bark darker, sky heavier with blue. Mirko felt time shifting, as if the forest was sliding him gently toward a place where hours fold in different patterns. He wondered if he would ever find his way back to the village paths, or if those paths would be the same should he return. The Leshy faded into the weave of tree and shadow once more, leaving only the hush of needles falling, the echo of a seed's heartbeat still lingering in Mirko's palm. Alone in the clearing, the boy steadied his breath and listened. The path behind him had already shifted, narrowing, uncertain. The one before him seemed clearer, yet it led deeper still. He tightened the red thread around his wrist, adjusted the axe on his shoulder, and stepped forward into the waiting dark. Somewhere ahead, a new presence stirred, the faintest hint of laughter not born of joy but of mockery, a spirit that did not walk with patience but with spite. The forest braced itself in silence, preparing for a contest older than memory, one in which the boy now walked as witness, perhaps more. The laughter was thin at first, like a reed pipe badly played, its notes curling in and out of the stillness until they pricked at Mirko's ears. He paused, hand tightening on the axe, not for the use of its blade but for the grounding weight of it. The moss braid seemed to pulse faintly, as though remembering the presence that had given it meaning. The air smelled of rot despite no fallen thing in sight. A sweetness turned wrong, drawing the boy's breath shorter. Between the trunks, shadows slid where no breeze moved. They carried a shape not whole, but assembled from spite, hunger, and mischief, without care for balance. This was no patient guardian, no trickster with wisdom beneath the jest, but something that had peeled itself from the bark of old grievances. Its eyes gleamed like candle stubs guttering in a draught. Its grin too wide, the corners cracked with malice. Where it passed, lichens paled, and the ferns bowed as though under frost. The Leshy did not appear as shield. Instead, Mirko felt the forest steady around him, roots tightening beneath the soil, branches lowering their weight as if forming a listening dome. This was his task, to watch, to understand, to see whether he might hold his courage as firmly as he had held patience. The boy's heart shook, but his breath remembered the rhythm of needles falling, and he drew air deep until it settled again into him. The spirit came nearer, whispering words that had no shape, only the tone of mockery. It circled, weaving a path of disorientation, trying to tangle his sense of place. Twice Mirko felt the world tilt, as though the forest floor slid beneath him, yet the red thread about his wrist held like a tether to truth. He whispered inwardly, "I belong," and the thought rang against the unseen walls of the wood. The spiteful being flinched at the sound, as though struck by something clean. A deeper rustle followed, and from within the thicket the Leshy's form began to take shape. Not towering this time, but small, no larger than a fox. Bark fur striped his flanks, his eyes 2 drops of amber glowing from shadow. He padded forward, unhurried, circling opposite the dark spirit until the two closed a ring with Mirko caught at its centre. Trickster-faced monster, guardian-faced defiler, 2 reflections of what power may become when bent toward care or corruption. The Leshy's voice, low and humming, did not carry threat but challenge. "Leave or be turned by your own venom." The shadow being hissed, spilling words that curdled into smoke, claiming rights to rot, to fracture, to poison springs, so that men and beasts alike would thirst. Its voice was all grievance, muttering that the forest owed it space simply because hatred had been born beneath its branches. Mirko watched, pulse hammering, and wondered if this was the monster the elders feared. The Leshy standing so close to cruelty that any heart unwilling to listen might mistake him for kin of the very evil he resisted. Yet when he looked closer, he saw the difference. The Leshy stood with the patience of belonging, while the shadow being shifted constantly, never still, never rooted, gnawing even at its own form. A gust rose from nowhere. Leaves swirled, pine needles lifted in spirals. The Leshy grew taller with each turn, his fox shape lengthening until antlers once more brushed unseen stars. The dark spirit shrank, though it clawed at the air, shrieked and spat false shapes into the clearing. It tried to appear as a weeping child, then as a lost traveller begging aid, then as a beast of fangs and hunger, but none of its masks found purchase, for the forest itself would not lend it belief. The Lesky stamped a hoof, and the sound cracked like wood splitting. Roots surged upward, weaving around the spirit's legs. It thrashed, but each motion only tangled it further, until at last it fell silent, glaring with eyes that promised return. The Lesky bent low, pressing a hand of bark and skin to the earth, and the roots tightened. Slowly the shadow was drawn downward, its hiss fading into soil until only silence remained, heavy and clear. The clearing breathed again. Ferns lifted, lichens regained their hue, and the smell of rot thinned to the clean tang of resin. The Leshy turned to Mirko, gaze solemn. Within those amber depths, the boy glimpsed sorrow, not triumph. The sorrow of one who must endlessly defend, who knows that the same shadows will rise again in other guises. Trickster he might be, but here the mask fell, and Mirko saw the guardian's weariness like rings hidden deep in the heartwood of an old tree. The boy bowed, not out of fear but reverence, and placed a hand on the moss braid of his axe. He whispered, not knowing if the words were his own or given to him, "You are not monster, you are memory." The Leshy inclined his head, a motion small yet vast in meaning. Then he stepped back into shadow, dissolving until only the sound of needles falling marked where he had stood. Mirko stood alone once more. The seed beneath the spiraled tree pulsed faintly in the distance, though he could not see it. The forest seemed to watch him, waiting not for obedience but for choice. Would he walk deeper still to witness more, or turn back to the village with what he had learned? His feet pressed into soil that felt like a question. He tightened the red thread around his wrist, lifted the axe onto his shoulder, and let the silence guide him onward, where deeper truths rustled in the leaves yet to be parted. The silence that guided Mirko forward was not absence but fullness. Each pause between bird calls, each creak of trunk against trunk, held a language older than speech. He let the rhythm of his steps fall into that cadence, each footfall a syllable, each breath a patient mark of punctuation. The forest received him without alarm, though its watchfulness never lessened, as though to say, "You are permitted but not forgotten." He came upon a brook that slid through the trees like a thread of quicksilver. Its surface trembled with the memory of the spirit just buried, and yet beneath that unease flowed clarity so pure it mirrored sky more faithfully than the sky itself. Mirko knelt, dipped his hands, and let the water cool his palms. He thought of the seed he had planted, of the Leshy's weary sorrow, and wondered if guardianship always carried such loneliness. The brook whispered no answer, only swirled around his fingers as though acknowledging his question without judgment. On the opposite bank, shapes flickered, shadows of deer whose antlers sprouted vines, foxes whose tails burned with ghostly flame, owls whose wings carried silence thicker than snow. They were not animals, yet not holy spirits either, but something between, born of the Leshy's breath and the forest's remembering. They watched him with solemn eyes, neither inviting nor forbidding. Mirko felt himself examined, not by malice, but by curiosity. Could this boy who bore an axe and a red thread truly walk without severing what he touched? He rose and crossed, the water barely wetting his boots. On the far side the air deepened into dusk, though the sun had not yet sunk. He entered a grove of oaks, vast enough to hold centuries within their boles. Their trunks swelled like pillars carved from living stone, their crowns interlacing into a cathedral roof of green. In the heart of the grove lay stones carved by hands long dust, circles upon circles etched with runes he could not read. The moss had grown over them in patterns that resembled words, as though the forest had written its own gloss upon forgotten prayers. There, in the stillness, Mirko felt the Leshy again, not as shape or voice, but as presence pressing from every direction, testing whether he would kneel, flee, or simply remain. He chose to remain, placing his axe gently on the earth, the moss braid glistening faintly. He unwrapped the bread from his satchel, broke it, and laid half upon the stone circle. The act felt small in the vastness, yet the air shifted as if the offering had been noticed. A wind rose within the grove, though no branch swayed. Out of it coalesced the Leshy, taller than before, yet thinner, his form stretched as if he were smoke bound to a human outline. His eyes shone with amber light, streaked by veins of shadow, and his antlers bore cobwebs that quivered like silver strings. He spoke without mouth. Guardianship is not sheltering alone. To protect is also to turn away, to mislead, to confound those who would harm. To them I am monster, and rightly so. Do you understand? Mirko's throat ached with the weight of the answer. He wanted to say yes, but truth slowed him. He remembered Borislav's terror, the trader's cries of curses, and how easily fear could paint the Leshy as demon. Yet he also remembered the healing of the sapling, the seed pulsing with possibility. He whispered, "I think I understand that you are both what they fear and what they pray for, depending on what they bring with them." The Leshy inclined his head, emotion both stern and approving. "You have seen the shadow that mocks. You have seen the thief who took and was taken. Yet deeper trials wait, for not all who trespass come with malice. Some come with ignorance, some with hunger, some with desperation. Tell me, boy of red thread, what will you do when the forest demands of you not witness but choice?" Mirko swallowed, the weight of the question heavier than the axe on his shoulder. He had no answer, and perhaps that was answer enough. The Leshy studied him, then faded into the oaks, his outline dissolving into bark and shadow, yet his words lingered like the echo of hooves on stone. The boy remained in the grove until the hush folded fully into evening. Fireflies lifted, tiny lanterns marking paths that shifted as they glowed. He gathered his axe, the moss braid now warm as though storing the breath of the Leshy himself, and turned toward the direction the light suggested. The forest did not resist, though each step seemed to draw him farther from the rhythm of his village, deeper into a cadence of roots, stars and breath. At last he came upon a fallen log, vast as a house, hollowed and filled with the soft glow of fungi. He sat upon it, weary yet alert, and let his thoughts wander. The Leshy was both monster and guardian, both trickster and protector. To the thief he was terror, to the boy he was teacher. Mirko wondered which mask he himself would face when his own heart grew older, when desire and pride pressed harder against him. The night deepened. Owls turned their heads soundlessly. Somewhere far off a wolf howled, not in hunger but in communion. A note carried like thread from hill to hill. Mirko closed his eyes, listening, his breath once again matching the fall of needles. Sleep pressed at him, but he resisted, knowing the forest might test him even in dreams. And as he drifted near that threshold, he felt it, a stirring beyond the tree line, something vast approaching, not with the malice of the mockery spirit, nor the greed of Borislav, but with a power heavy as storm clouds. The earth itself seemed to brace, and the Leshy's presence flickered faintly, as though preparing for a contest older and greater still. The storm's approach was first a tremor, so subtle it could have been mistaken for the shifting of roots. Mirko sat upon the glowing log, his breath steady, though the air thickened as if it carried the weight of thunder not yet born. The forest stirred in whispers, branches clinked softly against each other like anxious bells, owls took wing with solemn silence, and the brook he had crossed earlier began to churn, its voice deepened by unease. The Leshy's presence flickered, less absence than a drawing inward, as though bracing his strength. Mirko felt it like a hand pressed to his chest from within, reminding him that witness carried weight. He listened, every sense straining, until the darkness between the trees unfolded and something vast emerged. It was not man, nor beast, nor simple shadow. The form came as a rolling mantle of black smoke threaded with veins of red. A body without bone, yet heavy enough to bow the undergrowth. Faces flickered across it, some human, some beast, some neither, all twisted by rage or despair. Where it drifted, bark cracked and sap oozed like tears. A reek of scorched soil followed, though no flame had touched. This was no stray spirit. It was an ancient wound given voice, a gathering of malice fed by centuries of cruelties, by hunts without reverence, by fires set not for warmth but for waste. Mirko's heart thudded, yet the red thread about his wrist pulsed gently, as though urging him to remain. He clutched the axe, not as weapon but anchor, the moss braid cool in his grip. The monstrous cloud halted before him, its surface writhing, and from within rose a voice deeper than earth and sharper than iron. It mocked the Leshy, naming him coward, forest prisoner, slave of balance, too fragile to endure. It promised to unbind the roots, to hollow the trees into dead husks, to drown birdsong in silence. The boy trembled, but as the voice pressed against him, he remembered the Leshy's earlier question. What will you do when choice is demanded? He closed his eyes, breath slowing until it met the arithmetic of needles falling, and whispered inwardly, I am small, but I stand. The words were not defiance, but steadiness, like a sapling bending under storm, yet not breaking. The Leshy answered then, not beside him, not before him, but through the entire forest. His voice rolled in every rustle, every groan of wood, every beat of unseen wings. You are wound, not root. You are hunger, not seed. You will not take what you did not plant. The oaks shuddered in assent, their crowns tossing though no wind moved. Stones in the grove glowed faintly, runes waking as if to lend their memory. The shadow shrieked, its smoke writhing into tendrils that lashed at trunks, scoring them with wounds. Yet wherever sap bled, the earth thickened, healing almost at once, as though the forest refused to carry the scar. The Leshy's form rose now in full, antlers vast as branching rivers of lightning, eyes blazing with amber fire. Guardian and monster together, he towered until the very canopy bowed. He met the cloud with no sword. Instead, he spread his arms wide, and the roots beneath the soil answered. They surged upward, weaving into nets of living wood, binding the shadow's limbs. It thrashed, howled, split into 1,000 faces screaming, but the Leshy's grip held firm. The boy felt the ground quake, as though the entire forest lent its strength. Still, the shadow's power was great, fed not only by evil spirits but by men's neglect, men's waste, men's cruelties to land and beast. For each binding root, another strand of smoke broke free. The Leshy strained, his form flickering, part bark, part storm, part fading silhouette. Mirko saw it, the weariness, the endless labour of one who guards without rest. For the first time the boy understood why some saw only the monster. Guardianship this fierce could terrify any who carried guilt. The shadow lunged toward Mirko, seeking the smaller flame. The boy stumbled back, yet his wrist burned hot where the red thread lay. Instinct moved him. He pressed his palm to the moss braid of the axe, then drove the haft into the soil. At once, light flared, not blinding but steady, green and gold, as though the seed he had planted beneath the spiraled tree had answered his call. The glow spread outward in circles, weaving through roots, spilling up trunks, igniting leaves in a shimmer like dawn breaking beneath midnight. The shadow reeled, its smoke unravelling where the light touched. The Leshy seized the moment, drawing the roots tighter, pressing the spirit back. Yet even as it shrieked and dissolved, its voice lingered, promising return, promising that wounds cannot be buried forever. With a final cry, the darkness split and scattered, fragments fleeing into the soil and air like sparks carried by a bitter wind. Silence fell heavy. The Leshy stood, vast and trembling, then shrank, his form folding into something nearer human size, though his antlers still gleamed faintly. His eyes turned toward Mirko, sorrow and gratitude mingled. The boy bowed low, chest heaving, unsure what part he had played, only that the forest had used him as a vessel. The Leshy spoke softly, his words more felt than heard. Balance holds, but only for a time. The wound sleeps, not dies. You have chosen, boy. You stood. The choice will call you again. Then he melted back into bark and shadow, leaving Mirko alone with the axe rooted in glowing soil. The boy sank to his knees, heart echoing with the memory of screams and the weight of light. Above him the stars broke through the canopy, sharp and unblinking. He lifted his gaze to them, feeling both smaller and larger than he had ever been, and wondered what further trials the forest might yet ask of him. Mirko lingered beneath the stars, the hush of their gaze colder than frost. His breath slowed until it joined the rhythm of the trees, yet his heart still throbbed with the echo of the shadow's cry. The soil where the axe stood glowed faintly, moss braid damp with dew as though the forest itself wept in gratitude. He reached to lift it, but for a long moment his hands hovered, afraid that the weight he touched now was no longer wood and iron but vow. When at last he grasped it, the haft was warm, carrying the pulse of roots far below. He turned back toward the grove of spiraled tree and ancient stones, seeking the place where he had planted the black seed. The path unfolded as though remembering him, opening gently between undergrowth that parted like curtains. As he walked, the silence thickened, but it was no longer foreboding. It was attentive, as if every fern and stone bent to hear his steps. Fireflies danced low, tracing letters across the air in languages only sleep might fully read. When he reached the grove, he halted in awe. The seed had sprouted, a slender shoot rose from the hollow, leaves small yet luminous, their veins glowing with quiet emerald fire. Around it the earth looked healed, rich, unscarred, as though no frost nor wound had ever touched it. Mirko knelt, brushing his fingers gently across the new leaves, and the plant responded with a faint shiver of light. His heart swelled with wonder and fear both, for he knew this was no ordinary sapling but something the forest had birthed through his hands. A rustle stirred and the Leshy appeared once more. Not vast, not monstrous, but close, almost human, though his skin bore the grain of bark and his hair spilled with moss. His amber eyes fixed upon the sapling, and his expression was neither smile nor frown but something deeper, a grief softened by pride. He looked to Mirko and spoke in the slow language of breath through branches. Growth begins with wound. You place the seed where scar had been. It will rise, but what rises may draw envy, and envy calls teeth. Mirko lowered his head, shame flickering that he had not thought of such dangers. Yet the Leshy placed a hand upon his shoulder, and the weight was steadying rather than harsh. The guardian's gaze carried tired wisdom, showing that even protectors could not shield all, only stand when the need pressed most. The boy nodded, and in that nod felt a bond knit tighter. He was not merely witness now, but participant, bound to the life he had coaxed from soil. The night deepened, yet the sapling glowed brighter, casting green halos across the stones. In their light, Mirko glimpsed carvings hidden before circles spiraling inward, lines that mirrored the thread upon his wrist, runes shaped like roots spreading beneath soil. He traced them with trembling hand and realized they told stories of others who had stood here, long before his name had been born. The forest had always sought allies, mortals willing to shoulder slivers of its endless task. Some had succeeded, some had faltered, but each left a trace for the next to follow. The Leshy's form shifted with the shadows, his antlers lengthening until they twined with the branches of the great tree, his feet rooting faintly into soil. He seemed less figure than bridge between what grows and what wanders. Mirko thought then of the villagers who whispered of monster in the woods, and he wondered if they saw this moment, would their fear ease, or would awe itself frighten them further. He realized the truth mattered less than their readiness to listen. For those who come only with axe to wound, the Leshy must be terror. For those who come with offering, he is guide. As if hearing his thought, the Leshy's gaze deepened. Words rose unspoken. I am both. I am the teeth that bite when cruelty enters, and I am the hand that steadies when reverence kneels. Tell them, if you dare, but know that not all ears can bear the weight of balance. Some will prefer the tale of monster, for it excuses their trespass. Some will prefer the tale of guardian, for it spares them from guilt. Both tales are half, and halves cannot hold the forest. Mirko bowed, overwhelmed. He longed to promise he would carry the full truth, yet he knew the world beyond the trees did not always hunger for truth. Still, he whispered, "I will try," and in that trying he felt his chest steady, as though the forest had accepted his vow. Dawn began to grey the canopy, the first birds clearing their throats. The sapling's glow softened into morning light, its leaves now simple green yet still trembling with secret life. The Leshy faded with the stars, his outline dissolving into air, leaving only the sense of being watched. Mirko rose, the axe firm in his hand, the red thread damp with dew. He knew he must return to the village, at least for now, carrying with him what he had seen. Yet even as he turned toward the thinning path, he felt the forest stir behind him, aware that balance had only been held for a night, and that many more nights would come when its weight pressed harder. He stepped toward the world of men, each stride heavy with unseen roots, while deep in the grove the sapling shivered, its glow fading but not gone, as if waiting for the moment when envy indeed would call teeth. The village roofs broke the horizon like dull teeth, smoke trailing from chimneys that had never heard the forest breathe. Mirko's boots pressed into soil that grew harder, less patient, stones scattered like careless words. The axe weighed more heavily here, though not in muscle but in spirit, as though each step away from the grove stretched the bond thinner. He passed the pump handle, clanking in its rusted rhythm, and the hens scratching in dust that held no secrets. The world of men resumed its chatter, yet beneath it he carried silence so deep it bent the sound around him. His father met him at the door, eyes narrowing at the moss braid, at the strange stillness in his son's shoulders. He asked no questions, for men who work with trees know better than to press against silence that walks home with a boy. Bread was broken, stew ladled, yet the table's weight shifted, for Mirko had become both present and elsewhere. His grandmother's eyes, dimmed by years yet sharpened by wisdom, searched his face. She whispered no tale, but he saw in her gaze that she knew the forest had claimed him. Yet villagers notice. Whispers gathered, carried as quickly as smoke. A child walking paths alone, returning with eyes too steady, with thread glowing faintly at the wrist. Old fears resurfaced. They spoke of the Leshy trickster, thief of wanderers, master of illusions, who lures the unwise into eternal wandering. They pointed to Mirko as sign. He had been touched, perhaps claimed, perhaps cursed. Some pitied, some envied, some feared. By the week's end, men muttered that he might bring ill luck, and women crossed themselves when he passed. Mirko bore their gazes silently. He longed to explain, to say the Leshy was no monster but a mirror, no demon but a guardian twisted by what men carried into the wood. Yet the Leshy's warning echoed, "Not all ears can bear balance." He held his tongue, though the weight pressed heavier than stone. One evening, as twilight thickened into indigo, shouts rose near the fields. A shepherd stumbled in, white with fear, claiming his flock had scattered at the forest's edge. Lured by a figure tall and terrible, its laughter ringing like breaking branches, he swore the Leshy had taken them, dragging them into shadow. Panic kindled quickly. Men armed with torches and iron knives gathered, muttering vengeance, their eyes sparking with the fire they carried. Mirko's chest clenched. He knew the Leshy did not steal sheep, yet he also knew spirits prowled, feeding on fear, eager to wear his shape for their own mischief. Still, the mob would not listen to such subtleties. They wanted a monster, and they would make the Leshy wear the mask until truth bent beneath it. Mirko stepped forward, offering to guide them, but the men scoffed, accusing him of trickery. His grandmother's voice, thin but firm, cut through. "Let the boy go. He has walked where we have not." Reluctantly, they allowed it, though suspicion burned in their glances. The group pressed toward the tree line, torches spitting sparks. The forest received them coldly, its hush sharpening into something brittle. Birds fled, branches clawed at flames, and the path tangled. Though Mirko's steps found the right turns, Guided by the memory of roots beneath his skin, they reached the clearing where the shepherd's cries echoed, but the sheep were not penned by Leshy's hand. Instead, a darker thing crouched among them, its shape twisting, laughter spilling in jagged tones. It wore the Leshy's silhouette, antlers cracked and crooked, eyes glowing with spite. The men gasped, terror feeding certainty. "Monster!" they cried, rushing forward with torches high. But Mirko saw through the mask. The air around it reeked of decay, not resin. Its shadow shifted without rhythm, gnawing at itself. This was no guardian, but one of the spiteful echoes that crept into the forest's wounds, feeding on men's fear by borrowing the Leshy's face. Before the torches could strike, Mirko planted his axe in the soil, as he had in the grove. The moss braid shimmered, light spiraling outward in rings. The false Leshy shrieked, staggering, its stolen form cracking like bark in fire. It lashed at the sheep, but roots surged, twining around hooves, shielding the flock. Men stumbled back, torches sputtering, their cries torn between awe and terror. From the trees rose the true Leshy, vast and solemn, antlers catching starlight, eyes burning with both fury and sorrow. He strode into the clearing, his gaze fixed upon the mimic spirit. With a gesture, the false one unravelled into smoke, shrieking as it fled into soil, leaving only silence heavy with judgment. The villagers trembled, their faces pale. Some fell to their knees, others fled into the dark, torches scattering embers. They had seen what they long feared, yet also something stranger, the monster and the guardian in one, truth too large for their words. The Leshy turned his gaze upon Mirko, amber light steady, unriddable. Then, as swiftly as a gust, he vanished into shadow. The sheep bleated, huddled unharmed. The men muttered prayers, afraid to claim victory, afraid to admit confusion. They looked at Mirko with new unease, for it was he who had called light, he who had stood steady while their courage faltered. He gathered the flock silently, guiding them back to pasture, though whispers rose behind him like smoke. Chosen, cursed, marked. When at last he stood alone beneath the stars, Mirko pressed his hand to the red thread and felt it pulse. He knew the Leshy had shown himself not for the men, but for him, reminding him that guardianship meant bearing fear as well as trust. Yet in the hush he also sensed something stirring deeper, older envy sharpening teeth toward the sapling he had planted. Envy that would not rest until it tested what had begun to grow. The whispers clung to Mirko like burrs, following him through lanes and doorways, across fields where wheat whispered with the wind. Chosen, cursed, marked, each word shifted in shape depending on the tongue that uttered it, yet all carried the same unease. He was no longer simply boy of the woodcutter, but a figure touched by what others would not dare name aloud. His father's silence grew heavier, his grandmother's gaze deeper, and children stared at him as though at the edge of a well, unsure whether it gave water or swallowed light. Yet beyond the village murmurs, Mirko felt a different tug, subtle but constant. At night his dreams curved back toward the grove of spiraled tree, where the sapling glowed softly, leaves trembling like small hands trying to grow into their shape. He woke with its image burning behind his eyes, the moss braid of his axe damp with dew though the house was dry. The bond stretched invisible, thread from heart to soil, calling him into the forest with the insistence of breath itself. When dawn painted the roofs with gold, he yielded. Without word, he slung the axe over his shoulder, tightened the red thread around his wrist, and stepped into the woods. The path bent easily, remembering him, though it was not unchanged. Shadows lay heavier, streams ran swifter, and in the underbrush he caught glints of eyes that vanished too quickly, not of beasts, but of things testing the edges of patience. The forest hummed with a pressure, as if holding its breath. The grove awaited him. The sapling had grown, slender trunk reaching to his waist, branches tipped with new leaves that shimmered faintly between green and silver. Its glow was fainter than his dream, as though dimmed by some unseen hand. Mirko knelt, pressing his palm to the soil at its roots, and felt the tension, an unease not of growth but of threat. The earth beneath was restless, disturbed by something prowling near. A chill pricked the air, sharper than mere breeze. From the tree-line shapes began to gather, half hidden in gloom, figures draped in rags of shadow, limbs too long, faces shifting like smoke. They circled slowly, muttering in voices that scraped like stone. Their eyes gleamed with envy, fixed upon the sapling's tender light. Mirko understood. These were spirits of hunger, born not from cruelty, but from lack, beings who had never been granted root or branch, and who now longed to consume what they could not grow. He rose, planting the axe before him, its moss braid glistening. The figures hissed, shrinking back for a moment, yet their mutters deepened into chants. They did not lunge, but pressed with patience, confident that desire erodes even stone if left long enough. Mirko's pulse raced, yet he remembered the Leshy's sorrowful eyes. Guardianship is not only to shelter, but to turn away, to confuse, to confound. He could not strike, for the axe was not meant to wound, but he could stand, breathe, and let the rhythm of the forest steady him. The Leshy appeared then, not towering, but woven into the trunks, his shape flickering between antler and branch, his gaze smouldering with fatigue. He regarded the circling spirits without surprise, as one greets rain in autumn, inevitable, unwelcome, yet necessary in the great balance. He turned to Mirko, his voice brushing the boy's bones. "Will you hold with me?" The question was not command but offering, weight pressed into choice. Mirko tightened the thread around his wrist, lifted his chin and whispered, "I will." The Leshy spread his arms wide, and the grove responded. Stones glowed faintly, runes igniting, roots thickening into unseen walls. The spirits wailed, pressing harder, their forms collapsing and rebuilding. Desperate to breach the circle, the sapling trembled, its leaves shedding sparks of green light like desperate prayers. Mirko knelt beside it, pressing both palms to the soil, letting his breath sink deep, carrying steadiness into roots that quivered beneath. The struggle was not of blade and wound, but of endurance. The spirits pushed with longing sharper than knives, but the forest pushed back with memory older than their envy. Still Mirko felt his strength thinning, his chest tightening, his thoughts scattering like frightened birds. The Leshy's form flickered, strained by the ceaseless demand. His eyes met the boy's, amber fire dimmed yet unwavering. Balance holds only if held together, his gaze seemed to say. Mirko closed his eyes, calling upon the arithmetic of falling needles, the rhythm that had steadied him since the first meeting. Slowly his breath aligned with the sapling's tremor, each inhale drawing its fear, each exhale returning calm. The glow steadied, leaves ceasing to shake. The spirits shrieked, recoiling as though burned by quiet itself. They scattered back into the trees, muttering curses, their envy denied for now. The grove exhaled. Stones cooled, roots softened, and the sapling's glow warmed into gentle pulse once more. The Leshy straightened, his form tall again, though shadow lingered in his eyes. He looked to Mirko, sorrow and pride mingled, and nodded. Together they had turned envy aside. Yet, as the boy rose, he knew this was but a moment's reprieve. The spirits had not been destroyed, only delayed, and envy never dies. It waits sharper with each denial. He tightened his hand upon the axe, the moss braid cool against his skin, and felt the truth settle deep. To stand beside the Leshy was to stand without end, against hunger that would always return. Above, clouds gathered, their edges bruised with stormlight, as though the sky itself prepared for trials yet greater. The first drop struck a leaf and rang like a pin on glass. Then a scatter, until the canopy murmured with rain, not yet willing to fall hard. Mirko stood by the sapling, steadying its slim trunk with his palm. Clouds bellied low, the grove darkened with that old attention that visits when the world prepares to change. The Leshy waited near, half bound to the spiral tree. antlers twined with branches, so storm and forest might speak quickly. His eyes held fatigue and resolve. Small spirits peered from the stones, wary yet drawn. The hush of trunk said through him that the storm was message carried as water, and that a wrong voice might try to ride inside the roar. Thunder rolled like carts on a bridge. Wind arrived, oaks bowed, pines combed air. Down in the village a bell clamoured. The storm had found tinder, hay stacked high, fences dry after a stingy spring. Mirko felt a pull in two directions, a tug threatening to fray his red thread, forest or village. He could not be two boys at once. The Leshy's gaze found him. No command. The knowledge that choice ripens as weather ripens fruit. Go, the attention seemed to say, and keep your promise by leaving. Return if your leaving saves what you planted. Mirko lifted the axe. The moss braid clung cool to his wrist. He ran, carrying the breath of needles, letting it drum a calm within the clamour. Rain thickened. The path blurred, but where panic invents labyrinths, reverence remembers lines, and trees opened and shut like ribs to let him pass. He burst from green into the fields. A shed had caught flames gnawed its roof. Villagers fought with buckets. His father hauled at a beam. His grandmother gripped the bell rope, wringing steadiness into the rain. Mirko set down the axe and joined the chain. Water leapt hand to hand, heavy enough to bruise. Fire did what fire does, took what it was given, and asked for more. He worked until his shoulders ached, until steam rose where drench met heat. The shed collapsed with a sigh. Sparks rose and winged toward the forest line. He sprinted ahead of them. At the birch border he flung himself down, dragging wet cloths through puddles, slapping ember after ember until his hands smelled of scorch and wool. He whispered steadying words without grammar. Grove inside him lent patience to his arms. At last the sparks died on damp leaves. When he rose, the village had fallen into a hush mostly of relief. Faces turned toward him, some grateful, some shuttered by superstition that would not open. His father came, beard dripping, eyes bright. He tugged Mirko's shoulder and turned away. A thin sound answered the quiet, a lamb's cry beyond the road, where the fence ran crooked before the meadow yielded to wood. A gap had widened. Tracks scalloped the mud. The flock had strayed toward the tray line. Men swore, but exhaustion and wet discouraged them. Mirko felt a second tug, sharper than the first. The envy spirits would smell this chance the way wolves smell thaw. He turned toward the forest again. His grandmother pressed into his hand a twist of salt and a scrap of dark bread, gone damp, but still itself. Some doors open for old songs, her eyes said. He tucked them under his shirt and went. Between birch and alder the wet world brightened, as if light insisted on being born. He followed small moons until the track split again, confusion crafted by things that had learned from men how to bait blame. He closed his eyes and listened for the sapling's faint thrum beneath his ribs. He set his feet by that pulse, and wrong paths thinned like lies under silence. He found the lambs beneath a beech whose limbs held them like cautious arms. Around the outskirts, envy circled in lean shapes with soot skin and thistle hair. They hissed without mouths, asking to share the seed. Mirko set the salt upon a stone, crumbled the bread beside it, and spoke with breath alone. What I have is boundary, what you have is yearning. Take this and leave the roots. For a moment they paused, nostrils flaring at the human memory in the bread, at the clean sting in the salt. Some turned away, the storm rinsing soot from their shoulders until they were only rain and thistle again. Others pressed closer, bitter that enough is never theirs. The Leshy moved within the trunks, ready to seal the circle if the boy failed. Mirko laid the axe across the mud before the beech, a quiet gate, blade toward himself. If you must bite, let it be this tall and not what it guards, his breath said. Envy pressed once more, met iron, flinched and withdrew with a rustle like regret. The lambs, emboldened by space, held firm, nosed his sleeves and bleated questions he could answer only with gentleness. He led them home by the slow path that teaches hooves to choose patience. At the fence, men took the flock with thanks. Rain slackened. The bell ceased and swung on. Mirko looked toward the forest before turning back to the grove. In that glance he felt the Leshy see him, tired, soaked, and offer neither praise nor rebuke. By the time he reached the stones, dusk had found the undersides of leaves and hung there like dark fruit. The sapling seemed taller, though that might have been relief lengthening sight. He pressed his palm to soil, and the thrum he felt was joined by another, faint as a heartbeat behind a wall. Something large moving far off, not storm, not envy, but a step older than both. A summons walking on hooves of silence toward the borders the forest dared to claim. The thrum deepened as night unfurled its canopy, a soundless drumbeat woven into the soil itself. Mirko remained kneeling by the sapling, the damp earth clinging to his palms, while the forest hushed as though listening for something older than storms. Even the frogs silenced their chorus, and the brook's chatter thinned to a whisper. The boy felt it in his chest, an approach not of haste but of inevitability, heavy as centuries walking. The Leshy emerged slowly from the spiraled tree, his antlers etched with faint lightning, his eyes dim with fatigue, yet sharpened by vigilance. His gaze turned eastward, toward the unseen ridges where moonlight carved shadows. He did not speak, but Mirko caught fragments of meaning carried on the tension in the air. Something vast had crossed into the forest's borders, a will neither born of envy nor storm, but of dominion, a hunger to bind. The boy shivered, though the night was warm. He clutched the axe, moss braid slick with rain, and whispered inwardly, "What comes?" The Leshy answered not in words but by lowering his gaze, letting the forest itself answer. From the silence rose an image, iron hooves striking stone, banners of smoke, and voices chanting with reverence not for balance but for mastery. Mirko glimpsed men, not one but many, clad in leather hardened with plates, bearing chains and fire. They marched with purpose into the night, their faces stern with devotion to a god who demanded the forest kneel. Mirko's breath caught. These were no thieves creeping for roots, no wandering spirits draped in shadow. These were worshippers of power sharpened into weapon, men who saw sacred groves as altars for conquest. He turned toward the Leshy, and the guardian's expression was heavy with sorrow. For men who came in ignorance he could mislead, for those who stole in secrecy he could punish. But when many entered together, with faith in their dominion, their fire carried more weight than one forest's patience could bear. The boy's heart quailed. He remembered the villagers' whispers, their fear of monster cloaked in bark and antler. If they saw men of iron praying with torches high, would they side with the Leshy, or believe the intruders righteous? The answer pressed cold upon him. Balance trembled not only in roots and branches, but in the frailty of men's stories. The sapling quivered, its glow pale as moonlit dew. Mirko pressed his hand against it, whispering calm. He felt its tremor settle faintly, though its fear lingered. He looked up and met the Leshy's gaze once more. Within it burned a plea, though pride would never let it be spoken. Help me hold them. Before dawn the men came. Their torches flared unnatural, the smoke pungent with resin stripped from sacred trees. They moved in rhythm, chants vibrating the air with certainty. At their front strode a figure draped in wolf pelts, his beard braided with teeth, his staff capped with iron horns. His eyes were fever bright, fixed not on prey but on conquest. He raised his staff and cried out in a tongue cracked by zeal, "This wood belongs to flame, for flame is purity." The forest recoiled. Birds erupted from the canopy in panicked flocks. Deer fled deeper into shadow, and the brook thickened as though choking on soot. The Leshy rose, vast and dark, antlers blazing with ghostly light. He towered over the intruders, and for an instant they faltered, fear twisting their chants. But the leader raised his staff, and with a word of fire he cast embers high. They rained down, searing branches, igniting underbrush. The grove wailed as flame took root. Mirko's chest burned. He knew he could not fight them with axe or hand. He reached into his satchel, fingers trembling around the damp twist of salt his grandmother had given. He scattered it in a circle around the sapling, whispering breath rather than words. "Stand, little one, stand against teeth." The glow of the leaves brightened, pushing back smoke though its trunk trembled with strain. The Leshy bellowed, a sound like thunder through hollow trunks. He swept his arms, and the ground obeyed. Roots surged upward, knocking men from their feet, twisting chains into knots, dragging torches into mud. But where one flame died, another was struck, their zeal unshaken. The leader laughed, voice sharp with madness. "Monster, trickster, we purify what you corrupt." His staff struck the earth, and fire licked higher, daring the forest to resist. Mirko watched, torn between awe and terror. Here was the Leshy in full guardian and monster indistinguishable, fury and sorrow braided until even he seemed to shudder under the weight of his own role. The boy saw men scatter, some trembling, others chanting louder, and he understood. Each heart decided what the Leshy was in that moment. To one, a demon to be slain, to another, a protector of roots and beasts. Truth fractured like bark under lightning. The sapling's glow wavered, nearly swallowed by smoke. Mirko pressed his forehead to its leaves, whispering steady as falling needles. He felt the forest answer faintly, its patience strained but not broken. Around him, the storm of fire and roots raged, the Leshy's shadow vast against flame, the men's chants hammering like iron. Above, dawn finally broke, a faint pale light pressing against storm clouds. Yet even that light trembled as though unsure which truth it illuminated. Monster luring men to ruin, or guardian defending his wood from trespass cloaked in fire. The battle held, unyielding, and Mirko knew the test was only beginning. The pale dawn stretched wider, but its light wavered like a candle in a restless room. Smoke climbed upward, twisting into prayers half heard, while the grove trembled beneath the clash of fire and root. Mirko pressed his body to shield the sapling, his breath locked to its shiver, willing it to remain upright, though ash drifted across its tender leaves. The chants of the intruders boomed against the Leshy's roar, two truths colliding in sound. Monster or guardian, destroyer or defender. The leader of the zealots strode forward, his staff of iron horns blazing with unnatural flame. Around him men rallied, their fear buried beneath borrowed certainty. He raised his hand toward Mirko, shouting words that split the air. "See, he serves the beast, the child is marked. The wood's corrupted." His followers cried out in agreement, their voices sharpened by terror disguised as faith. Torches hurled through air, landing among roots and bracken, their sparks hungry for life. The Leshy towered, antlers vast as rivers of lightning, his eyes two suns burning amber. He swept an arm wide, and the ground rose in a tide of roots, swallowing flames, twisting torches to ash. But each victory cost him. Mirko saw his form flicker, bark dissolving into shadow, strength draining as he stretched himself too thin. Guardian? Yes, but guardianship is an endless debt, and even spirits stumble under its weight. Mirko's chest tightened. He saw clearly now the burden that shaped the Leshy's dual face. To protect meant to terrify, to preserve meant to deceive, to defend the forest was to appear as monster to those who entered it blind. Yet beneath that mask burned sorrow deeper than root, and in that sorrow Mirko found his courage. He rose, the axe clutched firm, the moss braid glowing faint as dawn. He stepped before the zealots, planting himself between them and the sapling. His voice trembled but carried. "This is not corruption. You see monster because you carry fear. Look, he defends what you would burn." His words met only laughter and scorn. The leader spat upon the ground, The woods deceive you, boy. Better to cut you down than let the beast spread lies. He raised his staff high, flame curling toward the sky. The Leshy moved then, swift as storm. He struck the earth and a wall of roots surged upward, barring the staff's descent. The zealots screamed, some fleeing into the smoke, others clinging to their faith as if it were a raft on dark water. Their chants grew ragged, no longer harmony but desperation. Mirko saw in their eyes the same fracture he had glimpsed in the villagers. Some longed to see guardian, others demanded monster. The Leshy became both at once, his form splintering into shapes that met each gaze with what it feared or craved. The sapling glowed brighter, drawing on the boy's steady breath. Its trunk straightened, leaves unfolding wider, casting a green sheen across the grove. The spirits of envy that had lingered at its edge shrank back, cowed by its light, though their eyes still glittered with malice. Mirko pressed both palms against the soil, whispering rhythm. Needles fall, roots hold, balance endures. Slowly the trembling ceased, and the sapling steadied like a child learning its first steps. The leader howled, thrusting his staff into the earth. Fire burst outward in a circle, consuming grass and stone alike. But the rune-carved stones of the grove answered, their ancient patterns glowing as if the forest itself awakened to remember. Light surged through the roots, splitting the fire, hurling it back upon itself. The zealots stumbled, blinded, their chants breaking into cries. The Leshy strode through the smoke, his form shadow and bark, and his voice rolled like thunder over water. You seek purity and flame, yet bring only ash. Go and carry your emptiness with you. Roots surged once more, lifting the zealots and hurling them beyond the grove's border. Their torches sputtered out in mud. The leader fell last, his staff shattering upon stone. He staggered to his knees, his gaze dazed, muttering prayers that no longer sounded whole. Crawling, he fled into the forest's edge, his faith cracking under the weight of what he had seen. Silence returned slowly, thick as resin. Smoke thinned, revealing sky streaked with pale rose. Birds crept back, hesitant, as though testing whether the air was safe to carry song. Mirko knelt, exhausted, his hand still pressed to the sapling. It pulsed faintly beneath his touch, its glow softening into calm. He lifted his eyes to the Leshy, who stood vast but wearied, his antlers dim, his shoulders sagging with unseen centuries. The guardian's gaze fell upon him, no longer question, but acknowledgement. Together they had endured. Yet in the depths of those amber eyes Mirko saw the truth. This was not the end, only one battle in an unending war. Runes return, envy sharpens, zealots march again. Guardianship is a circle that never breaks. Mirko rose, the axe steady in his grip, his red thread soaked with dew and smoke. He knew the villagers would not understand, that some would call him cursed for standing beside the monster. Yet he also knew that what he had seen was more than any tale whispered by Hearth. The Leshy was both faces at once, mirror and mask, guardian and terror. The forest breathed, releasing its long-held hush. Mirko looked toward the horizon, where faint light shimmered beyond the ridges. Uncertain whether it belonged to dawn or to fire, yet to come, the grove exhaled a tired calm. Ash settled on leaves like grey frost, smudging the green with memory of fire. The sapling stood, slender trunk blackened in streaks, yet its leaves still pulsed faintly, silver veins running through green as if the forest's heartbeat had chosen not to falter. Mirko brushed soot from its bark, whispering reassurance though his throat was raw with smoke. The ground beneath him felt heavy with strain, yet alive as though roots far below clutched one another for strength. The Leshy lingered by the spiraled tree, his vast form dimmed into something closer to shadow. Antlers, once sharp as lightning forks, now drooped like branches after storm. His gaze roved the grove with sorrow deeper than anger, resting longest on the scars cut by flame. He did not weep, yet grief radiated from him in waves, bending the very air. Mirko felt it press against his chest, not crushing but sorrowful, like being asked to carry silence too great for one boy. When the guardian finally looked upon him, there was no triumph, only question: how long can balance be held when men call fire holy? Mirko had no answer. His heart stirred with words, but each seemed too small, too brittle to meet the scale of what had just transpired. He lowered his eyes, shame curling that he could not comfort the one who had carried so much. But the sapling shivered then, leaves catching a shard of morning light. Its glow spread faintly across the stones, warming the hush with promise. Mirko rose, resting his palm against its trunk, and whispered, "It still grows." The words were fragile, yet they seemed to steady the Leshy, whose eyes softened, amber light dim yet enduring. They remained thus until the sun fully breached the horizon, gilding ash into brief beauty. The Leshy turned then, dissolving into bark and shadow, leaving Mirko with the silence of one who trusts another to keep vigil. Alone, the boy felt the weight settle heavier, for guardianship once seen cannot be refused. Days passed, though time in the village grew strange. Some praised Mirko, whispering he had saved the flock and fought fire. Others feared him more deeply, claiming he bore the mark of the forest, that his shadow moved when no wind stirred. Children watched him wide-eyed, uncertain whether to follow or flee. His father remained silent, shoulders bent as if beneath wood heavier than any axe could cut. His grandmother alone looked at him without fear, though her eyes carried the sorrow of one who knows truths that cannot be spoken aloud. By night, Mirko returned to the grove. The sapling grew steadily, though scars marred its bark, pale lines glistening under moonlight like old wounds healing. Around it, whispers gathered, spirits curious, some reverent, others bitter, all circling the new heart of the forest. The boy stood guard, the axe rooted in soil before him, its moss braid faintly aglow. Sometimes the Leshy appeared, silent, watching from the dark between trees. Other times Mirko felt him only as weight in the air, presence threaded into leaf and shadow. But peace was not constant. One night he felt it first in the soil, a vibration unlike root or brook, steady, heavy, deliberate. The sapling's leaves curled inward, trembling. From beyond the grove came a sound like hooves striking stone, though no deer made such thunder. Out of the dark emerged figures half beast, half man, ancient things born of hunts, twisted by cruelty, their horns curved like sickles, their hides stitched from shadows, their eyes burning with cold fire. They carried the scent of old blood, the memory of animals slain for sport, not need. They were not men, nor spirits of envy, but wraiths of violence itself, drawn to the grove by the sapling's fragile light. Mirko's breath caught. His hand tightened on the axe, though he knew iron could not wound such shapes. The Leshy appeared suddenly, vast and terrible, his roar shaking the stones. Yet the wraiths did not flee. They bowed mockingly, their laughter scraping like bones on bone. "Guardian," they hissed, "you kept us from feast too long. Now we take what you plant, and with it your heart." The Leshy's fury flared, yet beneath it Mirko sensed dread. These were not strangers, but echoes of his own failures. Every beast slain without reverence, every tree cut in waste, every shadow born where balance had been broken. They knew his weaknesses, and they hungered not for the sapling alone, but for the forest's very core. Mirko stepped forward, heart pounding. He remembered the Leshy's words. To protect is also to mislead, to confound, to turn away. He whispered to the sapling, "Hold, little one," then scattered his grandmother's last pinch of salt in a wide arc. The wraiths recoiled, snarling, though their hunger pressed still, their hooves scoring circles into the soil. The Leshy lowered his antlers, preparing to strike, though his form flickered like flame under rain. The boy knew then that this battle would not be won by strength alone. These were truths too deeply rooted to be torn free in one night. They would return, gnawing whenever cruelty reigned in men's hearts. But he also knew he could not yield, for if the sapling fell, hope itself might splinter. He raised the axe, not to swing, but to plant in the soil once more, drawing steadiness from root and rune. Light spread in slow circles, faint yet persistent, pressing back against the advancing hooves. The wraiths snarled, fading and reforming, their forms breaking into smoke but refusing to vanish entirely. The Leshy roared again, his voice filled with both fury and despair, and Mirko felt it ripple through him. This trial would not pass quickly. Guardianship was not a moment but an endless standing, again and again, against shadows that wear new faces with each age. The grove shuddered, the air heavy with dread. Yet the sapling glowed brighter, its leaves opening defiantly against night. Mirko's breath steadied, and though fear knotted his chest, he whispered into the hush, "We hold," and the forest listened, waiting to see if those words could endure. The grove breathed with strain, its silence stretched taut as bowstring. The wraiths prowled in circles, their hooves striking the earth with rhythms older than men's songs of hunting. Each step seemed to echo with memory of cruelty, the stag left rotting in snow, the bear slain for hide alone, the birds shot for sport. They were not intruders from beyond, but children of waste, born where reverence had failed. Their eyes smouldered with hunger sharpened by centuries, fixed upon the sapling's glow. Mirko held the axe upright in the soil, the moss braid damp against his palm. The light it cast spread in wavering rings, fragile as ripples from a dropped stone. His breath trembled, yet he bound it again to the rhythm of falling needles, each inhale steadying, each exhale firm. "We hold," he whispered once more, though the words felt smaller against the vastness of what surrounded them. The Leshy towered behind him, antlers shadowing the stars, eyes burning with sorrow more than rage. His voice rolled low, deeper than thunder. "They are not strangers. They are my shadow, born when I could not guard all. Every wound left open grew into them. Every cruelty unanswered became their teeth." His shoulders sagged, bark flaking into dust. "To fight them is to fight my own failure." Mirko turned, startled by such confession. To him the Leshy had seemed unshaken, an unending sentinel. Yet here stood the guardian bearing his weariness, his despair, and in that rawness Mirko saw again the truth. The Leshy was not monster for joy, nor guardian for pride, but both because the forest demanded, and even spirits carried scars. The wraiths hissed, their laughter jagged, mocking. They lunged, striking at the barrier of light, their horns scraping sparks against unseen walls. The sapling quivered, leaves folding in fright. Mirko pressed his hands to its trunk, whispering calm as though to a child. Its glow steadied faintly, fed not by strength but by his faith that it could endure. The Leshy roared, sweeping his arms. Roots surged from earth, coiling around hooves, antlers, limbs. Yet the wraiths did not fall. They broke apart into smoke, slipping through knots, reforming with cruel ease. Their hunger pressed deeper, their forms multiplying in the haze. Where one fell, two more crawled from shadow, as if cruelty never ended but only changed shape. Mirko's heart pounded. He looked to the Leshy, who strained, his vast form flickering as though pulled thin by endless battle. The boy understood suddenly. Strength alone could not end what fed on endless wound. Guardianship needed more than teeth. It needed something to change the story itself. He reached into his satchel and found nothing but a small scrap his grandmother had slipped there. The corner of cloth embroidered with old runes, frayed from years of use. He held it high, uncertain what power it carried. Yet when the sapling's light touched it, the symbols glowed. Words older than speech stirred on his lips. He whispered them, not knowing meaning but trusting their shape. The wraiths recoiled, their laughter faltered, their eyes dimmed, as if the sound of reverence fragile human, imperfect, was something they could not consume. The cloth fluttered, its glow weaving into the sapling's leaves. Strengthening their light, the wraiths shrieked, scattering to the edge of the grove, their forms breaking against the runes as waves against stone. The Leshy lowered his arms, watching with wonder shadowed by sorrow. Old prayers, he murmured, voice softer now, songs once sung by those who knew balance. They do not destroy hunger, but they remind it cannot own all. He bowed his vast head toward the boy. Antlers brushing soil, you carry what I cannot. Memory men forgot. Mirko trembled, clutching the cloth close. He did not feel like saviour, only boy with thread and scrap of prayer. Yet the forest had answered him, and for the moment the wraiths had retreated, fading into thickets to gnaw their envy in silence. The sapling straightened, its trunk taller than before, its scars glistening like silver threads stitched across bark. Mirko traced them with his fingers, marvelling that even wounds could become beauty when endured. His heart swelled, but also ached, for he knew the wraiths would not vanish. They would return whenever cruelty seeded them anew. The Leshy's amber eyes dimmed into tired glow. Each age calls me monster. Each age calls me guardian. But alone I cannot be both forever. He looked upon Mirko with something close to hope. Perhaps the forest seeks to share its burden, not bind it to one shape alone. The boy bowed his head, feeling the truth settle heavy, but not unwelcome. He was no spirit, no legend, yet already the villagers whispered his name with fear and awe. Perhaps one day he too would be tale, half curse, half blessing. He wondered if that was how all guardians were born, from boys who chose to stand when the forest asked. The night thinned slowly into dawn. Mist crept through roots, softening the scars of battle. The wraith's presence lingered faintly at the edge of sense, waiting, always waiting. The sapling shone pale, its glow threading into morning light. Mirko stood watch beside it, axe planted, red thread damp with dew. The Leshy faded back into trunks, his shadow merging with bark, his voice echoing faint as breath. We endure, but endurance alone will not be enough. Mirko lifted his gaze to the horizon, where the sky bruised purple with storm. He knew the forest's trials had only begun, and that the choice he had made would be asked of him again, each time heavier, each time closer to breaking. Yet still he whispered into the hush, "We hold." And the forest answered with silence deep enough to feel like promise. The morning that followed was heavy with mist, veiling the forest in a quiet that felt not restful, but watchful. Every branch dripped, every fern bowed with droplets, and the earth exhaled a scent of ash mingled with renewal. Mirko remained in the grove, weary from the long night, his body trembling with fatigue that reached beyond muscle. The sapling stood taller, its bark streaked with silver scars, its leaves trembling not in fear but in resolve. It seemed older than a single night should allow, as though each battle carved growth into its rings. The Leshy appeared at dawn's edge, his vast form muted, shadow braided with mist. His eyes burned faintly amber, yet they seemed dimmed by thought, as if he weighed more than the soil beneath mountains. He looked upon the boy and the sapling, and in that gaze lay pride tinged with grief. He spoke low, his voice threading through mist like roots through soil. The forest holds, but balance cracks. Shadows multiply because men forget. I can guard, but I cannot teach them. Not alone. Mirko's breath caught. To hear such weariness from one he had thought unbreakable pressed heavily on his chest. He wanted to speak comfort, but words felt too thin against centuries. Instead he touched the sapling's bark, letting its quiet pulse steady him, then whispered, "You are not alone now." The Leshy inclined his great head, antlers gleaming with dew. For a moment silence reigned, deep and full, until the air shifted with distant sound. From the village bells rang, not in warning, but in mourning. The tones rolled through mist, sombre, heavy, carrying grief. Mirko's stomach clenched. He knew then the battle had reached beyond the grove. Fire had left scars not only on roots, but on hearts. He left the sapling under the Leshy's gaze and made his way back. Mist clung to him, softening each step, as though the forest itself sought to shield him from eyes. When he entered the village, faces turned quickly away. The bell tolled above, its rope gripped by his grandmother's frail hands. In the square lay a body covered in cloth, smoke still clinging to its clothes. A zealot's torch, thrown wild, had struck a barn, and within a boy too young to flee had fallen. Grief rippled through the villagers, raw and heavy. Some wept openly, others hardened their sorrow into anger. Whispers flared. The Leshy, the cursed guardian, had brought this, and Mirko, touched by him, marked by thread and shadow, was blamed as much as the unseen spirit. A man spat at his feet, shouting that no boy who carried moss and rune could belong among them. Others muttered agreement, though a few turned away, unable to look upon him at all. Mirko stood frozen, grief cutting deeper than anger could. He had not lit the torch, yet he felt the boy's death settle on his shoulders. For if guardianship was to stand, then all wounds within the forest's shadow, whether tree or child, pressed weight upon him too. He left the square without defence, silent beneath the tolling bell. That night he returned to the grove, his steps dragging. The sapling shone faintly, leaves trembling in moonlight. As if sensing his sorrow, he knelt, pressing his forehead to its trunk. "I could not save him," he whispered, voice breaking. The forest answered with hush, not denial, not comfort, only presence. The Leshy rose from shadow, vast yet subdued. His gaze lingered on Mirko's bowed form, and when he spoke, it was with voice softer than before. "Not all wounds can be kept from bleeding. To guard is not to undo loss, but to stand so lost does not swallow all. Do you see?" Mirko's tears fell silently into soil. "Then what am I guarding if not lives?" The Leshy's antlers gleamed faintly with starlight. "You guard memory, seed and balance. Lives fall as leaves fall, yet from their falling comes soil that feeds roots. To guard is to honour both growth and loss." His words carried weight but not cruelty, sorrow but also necessity. The boy lifted his head slowly, gazing into the Leshy's eyes. In them he saw no monster, though he understood why others did. To witness such sorrow, to bear such endless debt, could only seem monstrous to those who did not wish to see themselves reflected in it. Guardian and monster were two sides of the same truth. He defends by terrifying, he protects by bearing blame. Mirko pressed his palm once more to the sapling. Its glow steadied, as though answering his heart's tremor. He whispered, "Then I will stand, even in grief." The Leshy bowed his head, antlers dipping low. "Then you are nearer to what the forest seeks." The mist thickened, curling around them, and within it Mirko felt something vast stir, larger even than the zealots or the wraiths of cruelty. It was not envy, nor hunger, nor fire. It was silence older than storms, moving with patience beyond comprehension. The forest itself seemed to brace, roots pulling tight, stones vibrating faintly, as though preparing for a trial unlike any before. Mirko shivered, the red thread hot on his wrist. He tightened his grip on the axe, the moss braid glowing faintly, and whispered into the mist, "We hold." But the silence that answered was not promise. It was warning, deep and endless, as if the forest itself knew that what approached might demand more than even guardian and boy together could endure. The warning lingered, heavier than storm clouds, its silence carrying weight that no thunder could equal. Mirko felt it in his marrow, the way animals sense tremor long before the earth shifts. The sapling swayed though no wind stirred, its leaves closing tight, whispering not fear but preparation. The Beside it, the Leshy's form seemed darker, antlers catching what little starlight remained. His eyes narrowed as if seeing beyond the veil of night. The forest stirred uneasily. Owls fell silent. Wolves padded low and hidden. Deer pressed deep into thickets as if guided by instinct, older than their blood. The hush grew so profound that even Mirko's breath seemed an intrusion. He clutched the axe until his knuckles ached, the red thread burning faintly against his wrist, though he did not know if it was warning or strength. From the distance rose a glow, pale, shifting, wrong, not fire though it shimmered like embers caught in fog. It moved as though carried not by men but by the air itself. The Leshy's voice rolled low, nearly drowned in silence. It comes, not envy, not cruelty, not zeal. Something older, something that does not hunger, yet consumes. Mirko's heart hammered. He wished to ask what it was, but no words seemed strong enough to survive the hush. The glow drew nearer, threading through trunks, slipping between branches, as though the forest could not resist its passage, and then it formed shape without shape. A presence that bent vision, a figure woven of pale smoke and memory. Its face was neither beast nor man, but a hollow mask, shifting with countless expressions, none lingering long enough to claim identity. The air thickened with dread. The Leshy stiffened, shoulders taut, antlers trembling faintly. For the first time, Mirko saw fear etch itself upon the Guardian's vast form. "It is silence," the Leshy whispered, voice broken with reverence and loathing. The spirit of forgetting. Not fire, not tooth, not claw, worse. It erases. The figure drifted closer, its touch wilting grass. Dimming glow, unravelling song from the air. The sapling bent, its light flickering weak as if memory itself were being leached away. Mirko felt his thoughts blur, names of trees slipping. Even his own grandmother's face wavered in his mind. He staggered, clutching the axe for anchor, whispering his own name just to remember it. The Leshy roared, his voice shaking trunks, antlers striking stone with sparks. Yet the silence did not falter. Where sound met it, it dissolved, leaving only void. The Guardian struck with roots, shadows, storms of leaves, yet all fell still within its aura. For every strike, silence grew, smothering. Mirko fell to his knees, the weight of forgetting pressing hard. His heart thrashed, terrified that soon even the sapling's name would fade, and with it all reason to fight, despair coiled. But then his fingers brushed the cloth his grandmother had given, the frayed scrap embroidered with runes. He pressed it to his chest. The stitches glowed faintly, not bright, but steady, and in that glow faces returned, his grandmother's weathered hands, the Leshy's sorrowful eyes, the sapling's first trembling sprout. Memory surged back, thin but fierce. He rose, staggering, lifting the cloth high. "I remember," he whispered, voice hoarse. "I will not forget." His words cracked, yet they carried weight against the hush. The sapling shivered, its light flaring faintly, fed by the boy's defiance. The Leshy turned toward him, eyes wide with fragile hope. The silence wavered, mask shifting faster, as though unsettled by resistance. It drew nearer, its void pressing harder, but Mirko's voice rose, though trembling. "We hold, and we remember." Each word cost him breath, but they held him steady. The runes glowed brighter, weaving into the sapling's veins. The Leshy bent low, his vast shadow sheltering boy and tree. His voice joined, low and resonant, not roar, but chant, weaving names of every beast, every root, every stream he had ever guarded. His litany was not battle cry, but memory itself, sung into the soil. The air trembled, forest shivering as though reminded of its own story. The silence faltered, its mask cracked faintly, its glow dimmed, as though memory was something it could not wholly consume. It recoiled, not defeated but unsettled, drifting back a few paces into shadow, yet its presence lingered, vast and patient, as though it had all eternity to wait. The Leshy slumped, drained, his form flickering like a fire struggling for breath. He glanced down at Mirko, pride and sorrow tangled in his gaze. You see now, to guard is not only to fight fire and fang, but forgetting, for if the forest is forgotten, it dies more surely than by flame. Mirko clutched the axe, trembling. He knew the truth of it, though its weight threatened to crush him. To remember was harder than to strike. To carry stories, scars, and names demanded endless endurance. Yet he whispered, voice steady despite fear, "And I will remember." The Leshy bowed his vast head, antlers touching soil in solemn vow. "And so we may yet endure." The forest held its breath, the silence retreating deeper into mist, but not gone. The saplings straightened once more, light faint but growing, yet Mirko felt it clear. The greatest battle had only brushed its beginning, and what came next would demand not only strength, not only memory, but sacrifice. The hush deepened, waiting as if the very world leaned forward to see what he would give when that hour arrived. The grove lay hushed, as if every leaf awaited an unseen judgment. The sapling glimmered faintly, though its glow seemed to pulse in rhythm with Mirko's heartbeat. Fragile but stubborn, he kept the frayed cloth pressed to his chest, its runes no brighter than embers, yet steady enough to ward the fading of thought. The Leshy loomed at his side, vast but dimmed, his antlers etched in dew like veins of silver, his eyes hollowed by the weight of what they had just resisted. Yet even in their reprieve, the air quivered with presence. Silence had not fled. It lingered at the edges, waiting with patience too immense to rush. It was not hunger that drove it, but inevitability, as if it believed all things must one day fade. Against such certainty, even guardianship felt like trembling defiance. Mirko sank to the soil, exhaustion dragging his limbs. The axe leaned at his side, its moss braid dark with dew. No longer glowing, he looked at his hands, at the dirt pressed deep into his nails, and wondered what strength could remain in a boy who had only scraps and breath to stand against such void. Yet, when he lifted his eyes, he saw the sapling stretching higher, its scars no less, but its trunk firmer. Even wounds could be growth. That realization steadied him more than strength ever could. The Leshy's voice broke the hush, rough as bark split by frost. "You held when even I faltered. Few mortals can stand before forgetting and still know their name." He lowered his head until his shadow covered the boy. "But this is not the end. Silence will come again, and each time it will press harder, for it feeds on doubt." Mirko swallowed hard. "Then I must learn not only to fight, but to remember more deeply." His words shook, but they did not break. He thought of his grandmother, who had whispered stories by firelight, each tale stitched with warnings and blessings. Perhaps stories were weapons too, not to wound but to endure. That night, as stars blinked faintly through ragged mist, he began to speak aloud, not to the Leshy who already knew, nor to the sapling which already felt, but to the darkness itself. He recited the names of rivers, of bird songs, of herbs his grandmother had taught him to gather. He told of his mother's laughter, his father's silence, his own fears when first he saw the Leshy. Each word seemed to weave into the air, fragile threads binding memory against the pressing void. The forest listened, hushed but attentive, as though each name spoken aloud fastened the world more tightly to itself. The Leshy closed his eyes, rumbling low, adding his own litany, the paths of migrating elk, the cries of wolves in frost, the first thaw of ice along hidden springs. His voice deepened Mirko's, two streams joining into one river. Together they built a wall, not of stone but of remembrance, fragile yet luminous. Yet as dawn approached, Mirko sensed unease deeper than the threat of silence. The villagers had grown restless. He dreamed of their whispers, voices calling him cursed, marked, unclean. In his dream they gathered at the grove with torches, not of zeal alone, but of fear. He awoke sweating, the axe warm under his palm, the sapling rustling as though sharing the dream. Leshy's eyes opened, amber glinting. You feel it too. Men fear what they do not hold. They will come, not because they hate the tree, but because they cannot bear what they do not control. Marco's throat tightened. He had seen it in their stares, in the spit at his feet, in the bell's toll that blamed him. Perhaps they would not wait long before marching into the forest to root out what they called curse. And when they came, would the Leshy meet them as guardian or as monster? The boy rose, brushing soil from his knees. Then we must show them another way. They must see you, not only as terror, but as protector. His voice quivered, for he did not know if such sight was possible. The Leshy tilted his head, shadow vast, eyes unreadable. Mortals see what they wish. To them I am the howl at dusk, the bent path, the lost child's cry. They do not see the fox fed, the stream cleared, the fire quenched. To make them see that may be beyond even you. Mirko clenched his fists, though fear shook him. If they cannot see, then they will destroy what they fear, and the forest will bleed again. His heart pounded, knowing the truth of it. His people's fear could become as dangerous as silence itself. The Leshy stepped closer, lowering his great head until his breath stirred Mirko's hair. Would you stand between them and me, boy? Between torch and root, between kin and forest? The question cut deeper than any wound. Mirko felt torn as if two roots pulled him in opposite soils. His blood bound him to the village. His spirit bound him to the forest. To choose one was to wound the other. Yet perhaps guardianship was not to choose, but to hold both in trembling hands and never let go, no matter the tearing. He lifted the axe, planting it firmly in soil. If they come, I will stand, not to strike them, nor to strike you, but to keep both from destroying each other. His voice was hoarse, but the words carried through the hush. The Leshy studied him long, shadow stretching wide, then nodded slowly. Then you carry burden heavier than most spirits. Heavier, perhaps, than even I, for I was made to guard. But you, his gaze softened, sorrowful yet proud. You choose it. The boy's heart trembled, but he did not look away. The sapling glowed faintly brighter, as if approving his vow. Above them, dawn cracked pale and uncertain, carrying with it distant murmurs of a village stirring, voices not yet raised but already restless. Mirko knew the time of silence would soon end, and sound, angry, fearful, human sound would fill the forest. He touched the sapling's bark once more, whispering, "We hold." The forest answered with wind through branches, not promise, not comfort, but the restless breath of a world bracing for storm. Morning broke not with bird song, but with the restless clamour of men. From the grove, Mirko heard the rise of voices carrying through mist. Shouts, the thud of feet, the clatter of iron. The villagers were coming. Their anger had gathered like storm clouds, and now it marched beneath banners of fear. He felt each sound echo through his ribs, heavy as drumbeat, unrelenting. The sapling shivered, its leaves folding, and even the Leshy stiffened, his vast body tense as a stag ringed by hounds. Mirko pressed his palm to the tree's scarred bark. "We hold," he whispered, though his voice wavered. The axe stood planted at his side, moss-brayed dark with dew. He tightened the red thread at his wrist, a small anchor of faith against the tide. Through the trees the villagers emerged, torches in hand though dawn already burned. Their faces were set hard, eyes wide with resolve edged in fear. Some carried axes, others spades or pitchforks. At their head walked Mirko's father, his jaw clenched, gaze locked on the grove as if it were an enemy fortress. Grief carved his features deeper than anger ever could. The grief of a child lost to flame, twisted into resolve that something, someone must pay. The Leshy's shadow rose vast and antlered, filling the space between trunks. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some faltered, but others stepped forward, voices rising. Monster. Curse. Burn it before it spreads. The words lashed sharp, born not of malice alone but of terror. Mirko stepped into their path, heart hammering. Stop. He is no monster, he is guardian. His voice cracked but carried. The villagers froze, staring at him with disbelief and dread. His father's face hardened, pain flickering but swallowed. Son, he said low and strained, step aside. That thing lured you, marked you. It will mark us all if we do not end it. Mirko shook his head, trembling. He saved me. He saved the forest. The fire you fear, he fought it. The shadows you cannot see, he holds them back. Without him, there would be no grove to till, no stream to drink. His words tumbled, desperate, but the villagers' eyes shifted uneasily, torn between doubt and rage. The Leshy loomed silent, his presence heavy. He knew too well that if he spoke, his voice would shatter what fragile trust remained. He could only stand, shadow stretched, sorrow carved deep into his vast form. Mirko's father stepped closer, torch raised. Do you not see, boy? It hides behind your words. If it were protector, why does grief follow in its wake? Why do children die? Why do shadows creep? You speak as if it guards, but all I see is loss. His torch flared, a breath away from flame meeting bark. The sapling quivered violently, its light flickering, leaves rustling in panic. Mirko lunged, arms wide, blocking his father's path. If you burn it, you burn me too, he cried. Silence fell sharp. The villagers froze, their fear folding into shock. His father's hand shook, flame trembling. Why, Mirko? Why would you choose shadow over kin? Tears stung the boy's eyes, but his voice steadied. Because shadow is not all he is. He is sorrow, because he remembers. He is fear, because he defends. If you burn him, you burn memory itself. You burn the part of us that knows we belong to more than fields and fire. The villagers stirred, whispers breaking like wind through wheat. Some lowered their torches, doubt stirring in grief-hardened eyes. Yet others clenched tighter, unwilling to let fear slip. The moment teetered, fragile as frost at dawn. The Leshy bent low, antlers brushing soil, his voice finally breaking the hush. It was not thunder, but chant, deep and low, names of rivers, birds, roots, each syllable woven with centuries. The ground trembled faintly, not in threat, but in reminder. The villagers flinched, yet some wept, hearing echoes of things they had once known but forgotten. Mirko's grandmother stepped forward, her frame frail but her presence strong. She laid her wrinkled hand upon her son's arm, pressing down the torch. You speak of monsters, she said, voice soft yet firm. But what is monstrous is forgetting. We once knew the Leshy as guardian. We told our children stories not of curse, but of respect. Have you forgotten? Her words rippled, soft yet steady. The villagers wavered, some lowering their weapons, yet the air quivered still. The silence lingering at the edge, its hollow mask watching unseen, feeding on doubt. Mirko felt it, pressing like frost into marrow. The choice before them was not only theirs, but the forest's. His father's hand shook, torn between grief and memory. Mirko held his gaze, eyes wet but unwavering. Let us mourn, but let us not destroy what still protects. If we burn him, grief will not end. It will grow. The sapling's glow flared faintly, steadying, as though echoing his words. The Leshy's chant deepened, sorrow bound with hope. The villagers swayed between fear and faith, their choice trembling in air thick as storm. And still, from the edge of the grove the silence waited, patient as stone, certain that even if torches fell, forgetting would return. Mirko felt its hollow gaze upon him, and knew whatever the villagers chose now, The greater trial still lay ahead. The wind shifted, carrying ash and birdsong together, as though the forest itself held its breath, waiting to see which way men's hands would turn. The grove trembled with human breath, and forest hush interwoven. Villagers stood frozen, torches wavering like fragile stars, caught between memory and fear. The Leshy remained bowed, vast form bent low, his antlers spread as if to receive either fire or reverence. His chant faded into silence, yet the echo of it lingered in roots and stones, a pulse too ancient to vanish at once. Mirko's father held his torch aloft, knuckles white, eyes locked upon his son. The boy's small frame seemed nothing against the towering shadow behind him, yet his voice had carried weight heavier than flame. The silence stretched, a taut thread between grief and trust. At last his father lowered the torch. Its flame guttered, casting smoke into the dawn. One by one, others followed, some with relief, some with reluctance. Torches dropped into damp soil, hissing faintly as they died. A sigh swept through the grove, branches creaking as though the forest itself exhaled. The sapling brightened, its leaves unfurling in timid hope. For a fleeting moment, it seemed the balance might hold, but then the air shifted. From the edges of mist came the hollow weight of the silence, unseen yet undeniable. Its presence pressed into marrow, stripping warmth from light. The villagers shivered, some clutching their arms, others glancing wide-eyed into shadows. They had lowered torches, but their fear still fed the void. Forgetting seeped through, not as blaze or beast, but as doubt that thinned memory itself. The Leshy rose to his full height, shadow stretching vast, eyes burning dim with strain. "It comes again," he rumbled, voice deep as cracking stone. "Not with fire nor iron, but with erasure. If they falter now, all will be lost." His gaze swept across the villagers, sorrow heavy in his amber eyes. "They must remember, or I cannot stand." Mirko clutched the frayed cloth, the runes glowing faintly against his palm. He turned to the people, heart hammering. "Speak," he cried. "Do not be silent. Name what you know. Tell the forest its own story." Confusion rippled through them, yet his grandmother stepped forward, her voice quavering but strong. She spoke of springs hidden beneath moss, of songs sung while sowing, of nights when stars guided hunters home. Her words laced through the air, fragile threads weaving memory into the hush. Another woman followed, telling of berries gathered under watchful trees. Then a child, voice piping, whispered the name of the fox she had once fed at the edge of fields. Each word lit faint sparks in the air, soft but defiant. The sapling's glow grew steadier, its silver scars gleaming like threads of moonlight. The Leshy's form brightened faintly, shadows tightening back into strength. Yet the silence pressed harder, mask of smoke shifting, seeking cracks in the web of words. Mirko lifted his axe, planting it firm in soil. He began to chant names as his grandmother once had taught him. Herbs, roots, the winds of different seasons. His voice shook but did not break. The villagers' voices joined, uneven at first, then stronger, weaving memory like a river against the encroaching void. The silence faltered, its hollow mask splintering faintly. For the first time, it recoiled, its shape thinning into mist, edges dissolving. Yet as it withdrew, it struck once, its void sweeping across the grove, erasing sound for a single breath. In that instant, Mirko saw the sapling's light flicker, its bark paling as though memory itself had been bitten away. His heart clenched, fear searing sharp, but then the glow steadied, fed by countless names whispered in trembling defiance. The void withdrew into distance, not destroyed but weakened. The forest exhaled, wind sweeping through branches, carrying voices outward, as if binding them into roots and rivers. Silence lingered beyond, patient still, but for now held at bay. The villagers stood hushed, torches extinguished, faces pale. Some wept, realizing what had nearly been lost. Others looked upon the Leshy with new eyes, not only fear but awe. He stood tall, weary yet unbroken, his gaze sweeping over them not with malice, but with sorrowful guardianship. Mirko's father stepped forward, torchless, his voice hoarse. If he holds back such shadow, then we have wronged him. Yet, how do we live with what we once feared? His question hung heavy, not for Mirko alone, but for all. The Leshy lowered his head, antlers brushing earth, his voice rumbling. By remembering, by speaking, by seeing not only shadow, but root beneath. His eyes lingered on Mirko, a faint glimmer of pride breaking through sorrow. The villagers murmured, uncertain, but none raised torch again. They turned slowly, retreating back to fields, their whispers carried like fragile promises. The grove fell quiet once more, the sapling glowing steady, its scars gleaming silver against dawn. Mirko knelt at its side, exhaustion weighing him down. He whispered to its bark. We held. The sapling rustled faintly, as though answering. The Leshy stood watch, vast and silent, his presence heavy but no longer alone. Yet in the distance beyond sight, the silence lingered still, patient as stone, waiting for the day when words might falter and forgetting return. Mirko lifted his eyes to the horizon, where storm clouds gathered once more. He knew this was not the end. It was only a pause, fragile and fleeting, before the greatest trial demanded all he had left to give. The storm clouds that gathered upon the horizon did not break with rain. They hung swollen and dark, as if the sky itself bore grief too heavy to release. In the grove, the sapling grew stronger by the day, its trunk thickening, its roots threading deeper, yet its light was no longer gentle. It pulsed with urgency, as if it knew time pressed close. Mirko kept vigil beside it, his voice hoarse from nights of naming, his hands raw from pressing runes into soil. The villagers came and went, leaving offerings of bread, salt, and whispered apologies. But their fear had not vanished. It crouched behind their reverence, waiting for the moment to rise again. The Leshy lingered always in the shadows. His form seemed both grander and dimmer, his antlers etched with new cracks, his eyes hollowed but aflame. He no longer spoke often, but when he did, his words carried the weight of centuries unravelling. Balance bends, he told Mirko one dusk, his voice low and rumbling. The forest endures, but the silence grows bolder. It waits for one moment, for one failing, and then it will unweave all. Even roots cannot hold forever if memory falters. Mirko clenched his fists, the red thread at his wrist frayed but unbroken. Then we cannot falter. His words were steady, yet within he felt the gnawing of doubt. For he knew how fragile men's tongues were, how quickly they tired of remembering. Even his own breath wavered, and the silence pressed harder each time. That night the dream returned, not of torches or wraiths, but of the grove empty. The sapling was gone, its roots ash, its scars erased as though it had never grown. The Leshy stood hollow-eyed, antlers broken, his voice a whisper drowned by void. And in the dream, Mirko opened his mouth to call out, but no name came. His tongue was barren, his mind blank. He woke with sweat cold on his skin, the fear sharper than any claw. He rose and went to the sapling. Its bark was warm beneath his palm, alive and steady, yet even as he touched it, he felt the faint tremor of silence encircling. Closer now, like frost creeping into cracks. He whispered names until dawn, though his throat burned, his breath thin. When morning came, the villagers gathered again. Some carried tools not as weapons but as offerings. Ploughs, baskets, small trinkets left at the grove's edge. They knelt, speaking softly of hunts, harvests, births and burials, their voices braided into memory, fragile yet real. But among them, Mirko sensed unease, the shadow of forgetting already at their backs. He saw a boy no older than himself staring blankly, lips parted as if unable to recall even his own dog's name. The Leshy lowered his head, sorrow deepening. It creeps faster. It tastes their weakness. Soon it will not wait at edges. It will enter, hollowing from within. Miko's heart clenched. He looked at the villagers, his people, his blood, and saw how thin their strength was compared to what pressed unseen. He realized then the forest's balance could not be held by guardian and boy alone. It needed more, something greater, something given. The sapling's glow pulsed as if echoing his thought. That evening, he returned to the grove alone. His grandmother waited by the sapling, her face lined deeper than years should allow, her hands trembling as she traced the silver scars on its bark. "I have seen this before," she murmured, eyes distant. "Each age the silence comes, each age it takes for men forget and spirits tire. But each age someone gives what they cannot keep, and memory roots anew." She turned, her gaze piercing. "It will ask this of you." Mirko's breath caught. "What must I give?" A hand cupped his cheek, warm but frail. "Not life alone, but self. To root memory so deeply that even silence cannot erase it. You must become part of it. Flesh into bark, breath into leaf, name into root. You will endure, but not as boy." Fear struck him, sharp as frost, to lose himself, to become tree, to speak never again. Was that guardianship's end? He wanted to protest, to say he was not ready, but the sapling's pulse under his palm told him truth. Guardianship was never chosen lightly, yet he had chosen when he stood between torch and root. The Leshy emerged then, his vast form shadowing both. He looked at Mirko with eyes not of command, but of sorrow. "I could not tell you, for I am bound to guard, not to give, but you are free. Your choice would weave memory stronger than mine ever could." Mirko closed his eyes, tears hot. He thought of the boy lost to fire, of his father's grief, of the villager's doubt, of the forest scarred but breathing. He thought of the silence, patient and certain, and he thought of the sapling trembling but alive, its scars gleaming like stars. When he opened his eyes, he whispered, voice steady though soft, "If this is the way, then I will give. But let me hold until the last moment. Let me stand once more before the silence, not as tree, not as shadow, but as boy. Only then will I root." The Leshy bowed low, antlers brushing soil, reverence heavy. His grandmother wept quietly, but did not deny. The sapling's leaves rustled in answer, silver veins gleaming brighter in dusk. And beyond the grove, the silence stirred, its mask of void bending closer, as if it had heard the vow and waited to test it. The forest shivered, bracing for the hour when all balance would be demanded, and the boy's final choice would either root memory eternal, or let forgetting swallow all. Night closed heavy upon the grove, a weight more than darkness, as though the sky itself pressed downward. The sapling's silver scars gleamed faintly, its leaves folded tight as if bracing for unseen wind. Around it, the villagers huddled with hushed voices, each clutching scraps of memory, songs, prayers, stories spoken again and again so they would not slip. Yet even as they whispered, words trembled thin, for the silence had drawn near, unseen but undeniable. Mirko stood at the sapling's base, the axe planted before him, the frayed cloth pressed tight to his chest. His throat burned from nights of speaking, yet he knew one night more remained, and perhaps no dawn would follow. The Leshy lingered close, vast shadow rising, his antlers jagged against the pale shimmer of stars. His eyes glowed with sorrowful resolve, amber dimmed to embers. He knew what the boy had vowed, and though it tore at him, he would not speak to dissuade. From the mist the silence unfurled. It came not with roar nor flame, but as absence, the sudden vanishing of cricket song, of owl cry, of wind. The villagers gasped, Some clutching ears, though nothing sounded. The hollow mask drifted closer, shifting with countless expressions that dissolved before recognition. Its void pressed heavy, unraveling thought. One by one, names faltered on lips, eyes glazed, hands slackened, memory frayed. The sapling shuddered, its glow paling. The Leshy bared his teeth, roots and shadow rising in defiance. He struck with storms of branches, with floods of leaf and earth, but as before, each blow dissolved into stillness, leaving only void. The guardian staggered, his vast form dimming, antlers cracking. His roar faltered into silence, swallowed before it touched air. Mirko's chest burned. He saw his people faltering, his guardian failing, his tree dimming. He knew then that the hour had come, the vow his grandmother had spoken, the giving beyond return. He pressed his palm to the sapling's trunk, tears burning his eyes. "Take me," he whispered. "Root me if it will hold memory against forgetting." The sapling flared faintly, silver scars glowing brighter. As if answering, the Leshy turned sharply, amber eyes wide, sorrow erupting into anguish. He moved forward, but faltered, his strength too wan. "Boy," he rasped, his voice nearly gone. "Do not," yet beneath the plea, lay the truth. He knew it was the only way. Mirko lifted the cloth, pressing it to the tree. The runes ignited, weaving into bark, spreading like veins of fire. His body shook, light threading into him, pulling breath into root, blood into leaf, name into earth. He felt himself thinning, unraveling not into void, but into memory. Each heartbeat etched into bark, each thought carved into root. His pain was sharp, then distant, then vast, until he was no longer only boy, but something deeper, woven into the forest's marrow. The silence pressed harder, its mask bending close, but as it touched the sapling, light burst outward. Not flame, not roar, but song. Every voice Mirko had ever heard, every name ever spoken in love or reverence. The villagers' prayers, the Leshy's chants, his grandmother's stories, even the cry of the boy lost to fire, all threaded together, bound by Mirko's sacrifice. The void recoiled, its mask cracked, fissures splitting as though memory itself was poison to it. It writhed, dissolving at the edges, retreating back into mist with a soundless scream. The grove shook, roots trembling, leaves shivering, as if the forest exhaled with sudden release. When silence fell again, it was true silence, gentle, natural, filled with the hum of crickets returning, the sigh of wind through branches. The villagers collapsed to their knees, some weeping, some staring in awe. The sapling glowed steady, its trunk taller, its scars silver bright, and within it, faintly they felt presence, the boy's breath, the boy's name, rooted eternal. The Leshy bowed low, his antlers brushing soil, his vast form trembling. Sorrow poured from him, yet beneath it was pride, vast and aching. He whispered, voice thick, "Guardian." Not monster, not child, guardian. His words sank into root and stone, binding vow to vow. The villagers rose slowly, their fear eased but their grief deep. They looked upon the sapling with reverence, some pressing hands to its bark, whispering thanks. They knew Mirko had given more than life. He had given self, so they would not forget. The grove settled into quiet, moonlight painting silver across leaves. The Leshy remained, his shadow stretching vast, yet for the first time not alone, for though Mirko's voice was gone, his memory breathed through every root, every scar. The forest was not only guarded, it was remembered, and beyond the trees, far in mist, the silence lingered still, diminished but not destroyed. It waited with patient certainty, knowing ages would pass, and memory would fray again. Yet for now, it was held, bound by boy into root, by guardian into sorrow, by villagers into story. The night deepened, the sapling shone, and the forest whispered with new voice. a harmony of shadow and sacrifice, a promise fragile yet eternal. The dawn that followed was unlike any other the villagers had known. Mist curled softly over the grove, but within it shimmered a light that seemed to breathe, neither of sun nor of moon, but of memory itself. The sapling, no longer frail, had stretched higher in the night, its trunk widening, its roots plunging deeper. Silver veins glowed beneath its bark, pulsing as though a heartbeat echoed inside. When the wind stirred, its leaves whispered, not merely the rustle of foliage, but something more, a cadence that carried syllables half remembered, words breathed in dreams. Some swore they heard Mirko's laughter woven through it, or his quiet determination that had steadied them in their fear. The villagers knelt in reverence. Some pressed palms to the earth, others touched the bark, whispering their own names, the names of their children, the names of those lost. Each word seemed to take root, absorbed gently into the sapling as though it craved remembrance. And with every name the villagers felt lighter, as if they had given their memory a vessel that could not be taken. The Leshy watched in silence. His shadow loomed vast, yet his eyes softened as he beheld the people, no longer trembling with suspicion, but steadied by awe. For centuries he had guarded in solitude, misjudged as a beast who lured wanderers, cursed as demon when crops failed, whispered of in fear by firesides. Yet now they looked upon him differently. Their gazes did not flinch nor turn away, but met his amber eyes with something like understanding. Some even bowed, not in terror but in thanks. He felt the shift deep within. Guardian. They would call him now. Perhaps monster still lingered in some corners of their thoughts, but the balance tilted. His heart, though heavy with Mirko's sacrifice, swelled with a strange warmth he had long forgotten. Kinship, fragile but real. As days passed, the grove became more than sanctuary. It grew into a place of gathering, where stories were spoken not only of the boy who had given himself, but of the Leshy who had stood unyielding, and of the forest that held memory for them all. Children were brought to the tree as soon as they could speak, taught to whisper their names so the roots might keep them safe. Hunters laid arrows at its base before venturing into the wood, asking for guidance rather than fearing to be led astray. Even old songs were mended, verses rewritten to honor guardian and boy together. But the Leshy, though content to see harmony bloom, felt the tremor of unease, for he knew what men forgot easily, that the silence did not vanish, it only recoiled. It lingered still at edges where memory thinned, waiting with patient hunger. He could feel it like cold beyond the fire's glow, distant, but inevitable. He wondered how many seasons would pass before the villagers grew careless again, before they spoke less, remembered less, and left the sapling untended. He wondered if even Mirko's rooted spirit could endure alone when silence pressed once more. One evening, as twilight deepened into violet, the Leshy approached the tree. He laid a massive hand against its bark, tracing the silver scars. "You hold them now," he murmured, voice low, "but who will hold you when time wears thin?" The tree trembled faintly beneath his touch, its light brightening as though in answer, and in that pulse, he felt the boy's presence, faint yet clear. Not words, but resolve. Mirko had not vanished. He endured, woven into root and branch, watchful still. The guardian closed his eyes, letting sorrow ease into quiet pride. "Then we guard together," he whispered, and withdrew. Yet not all hearts in the village were eased. Among them were whispers, quiet but growing, that perhaps the boy's sacrifice had bound too much. Some feared the sapling, claiming its glow too unnatural, its whispers unsettling. One elder murmured that to root a soul in wood was no blessing but curse, and that some day it would twist, though most dismissed such fears. The Leshy's ears caught them, and his heart stirred with unease, for doubt was soil in which silence thrived. The seasons shifted. Snow cloaked the grove, melting into spring's floods, which fed the tree until it towered higher still. Birds nested in its branches, and their songs echoed sweeter than elsewhere, as if carried on memory's breath. Children played around its roots, weaving red threads like those Mirko once wore. The villagers learned to live not in fear of the forest, but in rhythm with it. Yet the Leshy's watch never softened. Each dusk he stood sentinel, eyes fixed beyond the borders, listening for the faintest hush that was not natural quiet, but the creeping hollow of the silence returning. And one night he heard it. It was faint, a pause between bird calls, a stillness in the undergrowth. The villagers did not notice, nor did the children wake, but the Leshy felt it, sharp and cold, sliding into the edges of thought. His heart clenched, his antlers ached, and he knew the forest's trial was not ended, only delayed. The silence had been wounded, not slain. It would return, perhaps not in his age, perhaps not in theirs, but it would return. He laid his hand once more upon the sapling, feeling the boy's memory steady beneath his palm. "We are not done," he whispered into the night, "but we are ready." And as the wind carried his vow, the grove answered with a shimmer of silver leaves, as if Mirko himself breathed agreement, holding fast against the dark yet to come. The seasons continued their slow circle, each laying another layer of memory upon the grove. Spring bloomed with tender shoots, summer thickened the canopy with shade, autumn scattered leaves like gold, and winter hushed the land beneath a silver shroud. The sapling was no longer a sapling, but a tree of stature, tall enough that its crown brushed the first touch of dawn, and its trunk broad enough that 3 men could not encircle it with arms. Its bark still shimmered with faint silver scars, living testament to the fire that had once tried to consume it, and to the boy whose heart now pulsed within its roots. The villagers had woven their lives around it. They held their weddings beneath its boughs, cradled their dead in the soil near its roots, and taught each child to speak their first word into its bark. In time, new stories arose, some truer than others. Some said the boy's soul wandered still in dreams, guiding hunters when lost. Others claimed the Leshy himself sat each night beneath the tree, speaking to the spirit within as if to kin. A few, bolder in their whispers, feared the binding of a soul was unnatural, and that someday the tree would awaken with will of its own. The Leshy listened to every tale. He walked among the forest as guardian, his form sometimes vast as oak, sometimes slight as shadow, but always present. The people did not fear him as they once had. Instead, they looked for him at the edge of fields or the curve of streams, leaving offerings not of desperation, but of respect. Yet even in their reverence, he sensed the old seeds of forgetting. Time dulled sharp fears, and with it dulled devotion. He knew that memory must be tended like flame. Left unwatched, it would fade to ash. One evening, he returned to the tree as twilight bled violet through the sky. He laid his hand against its bark, and for the first time in many seasons he heard not only whisper but voice. It was faint, like breath at the edge of sleep, yet clear. "I am still here," Mirko said, though no lips moved, only leaves rustled in the breeze. The Leshy bowed his great head, antlers brushing branches in reverence. "And still you hold them," he murmured, sorrowful and proud all at once. Yet Mirko's presence trembled, like light behind thin cloth. "They forget," the boy's voice sighed. "Not all, not yet, but some. Each season it grows easier for them to speak less, to trust the tree to remember for them. But memory is not strong if only planted. It must be spoken, carried, lived." The Leshy's heart clenched. He had seen it already in the children who ran laughing through the grove, their games brighter than their prayers, their voices full of joy but light of reverence. He had seen it in the elders who trusted the roots so deeply that they no longer whispered daily names, and he knew the silence waited, patient as ever, for the moment when memory would wane. He whispered back into the bark, "Then we must remind them. Not with fire, not with fear, but with story." His amber eyes lifted toward the village, where lights kindled against night. He realized then that guardianship was not only battle against the void, it was the shaping of remembrance, the weaving of tale into flesh. If people saw only monster, they would fear and forget, but if they saw guardian, if they carried story with them, then memory might endure longer than roots alone could hold. The forest stirred with agreement. Leaves rustled as if echoing, and from distant hollows came the calls of wolves, owls, and deer, voices threading together in strange harmony. It was as though the wild itself pledged to keep the tale alive, so men would not bear the burden alone. And yet in the Leshy's heart, unease coiled. He had seen too many ages to trust entirely. He knew that one day, stories twisted, guardians became monsters in the telling, and monsters sometimes saints. Already there were children daring each other to linger too close to the grove at night, whispering that the Leshy might appear and steal their voices if they did not run. He could not hate them for it. They were only children, but he heard the first cracks where fear might seep again. Still, he did not despair, for Mirko's light remained, faint but enduring, and the villagers' voices had not yet fallen silent. The balance held, fragile but alive, and though the silence lingered beyond the edges, it did not dare draw near again, not while memory still breathed through root and leaf. That night, the Leshy remained beneath the tree until stars wheeled bright above. He gazed into the silver scars, listening to the pulse within, feeling the boy's presence steady him. "We are not finished," he whispered into the night, "but we are not broken either." And in the stillness, the tree glowed faintly, silver veins tracing its bark like constellations. It was both tomb and cradle, monument and promise, a living reminder that even in the face of forgetting, something could endure. The Leshy rose then, his form casting long shadows across the grove. He looked once more toward the village, where laughter faintly drifted, and beyond to the horizon where mist gathered thick. He knew the silence waited still, biding its time, patient as stone, but for now, memory held, and guardianship remained. He stepped into the forest, branches bending to let him pass, shadows weaving close. Behind him, the great tree shimmered softly, a beacon not of terror, but of remembrance. Its roots spread deep, its leaves whispered names, and in its heart, the boy who had chosen still breathed. And though the night was calm, the question lingered, fragile as dew. How long would men hold fast to memory before silence called again? The Leshy carried that question with him into the dark, knowing it would shape the fate of both guardian and grove in days yet to come. The years turned to decades, and still the great tree rose from the heart of the grove, its branches spreading wide like arms that gathered both forest and village in quiet embrace. Its roots ran so deep that springs welled at its base, clear and cold as though memory itself had become water for those who thirsted. Beneath its canopy, life was shaped. The villagers no longer spoke of fear when they spoke of the Leshy, nor of curse when they spoke of the wood. They spoke of guardianship, of pact, of the thin silver line that bound men and spirits together. The Leshy endured, his form shifting with seasons, sometimes vast as mountain oak, sometimes no more than a shadow slipping between birches. His antlers grew weathered, his eyes carved deeper by centuries of watching, yet within them burned the same steady flame. He guarded still, though now not only against threats of claw or flame, but against the slow erosion of forgetting. He moved among the people in silence, listening to their songs, their laughter, their quarrels, their prayers. He heard where memory thinned, and where it thickened, and he sowed gently where soil grew barren. At times he bent branches to shield a wandering child, or stirred roots to guide a lost hunter home, leaving behind not terror but a tale of unseen kindness. And always he returned to the tree. When he laid his palm against its bark, the silver veins glowed faintly, and he felt Mirko's presence pulse steady. The boy was no longer boy, but not lost either. He was woven into root and leaf, into every whisper of name the villagers gave, into every thread of memory they entrusted to the tree. At times his voice rose faintly, not in sorrow but in calm, a reassurance that he endured. "We hold together," it would sigh, and the Leshy would bow his head, knowing it to be truth. Generations passed, and the grove became a place not of fear, but of pilgrimage. Travellers came from far villages, bringing their own names to speak into the bark, their own stories to root in its veins. The Leshy watched from shadows, unseen but not absent, allowing his legend to spread. Some called him Spirit of Justice, others Forest Father, few still Monster in hushed tones, but all acknowledged his presence. His myth had shifted, braided now with memory of boy and tree, guardian and sacrifice. The silence did not vanish. At the edges of night, in the hollow between heartbeats, it lingered still, patient as stone. The Leshy felt it in moments when a villager forgot to whisper a name, when a story went untold, when silence in the wrong place stretched too long, but never again did it come unchallenged. For now it was met, not by one voice alone, but by many, by the whispers of children, by the chants of elders, by the living memory rooted in wood and leaf. The silence recoiled from this, unable to unweave what was spoken and remembered as one. The Leshy understood then that his role was not to vanquish, but to tend. He was not a slayer of void, but a keeper of balance, and in tending he found purpose deeper than endless struggle. He was no longer shadow feared at the forest's edge, nor beast told of to frighten children. He was guardian, sometimes stern, sometimes sorrowful, but always present, always bound. One winter night, when snow lay thick and moonlight silvered every branch, he stood again before the tree. The village lay quiet, the people asleep, their dreams warm with stories they had spoken by fire. The Leshy pressed his hand to the bark and felt Mirko's presence calm, steady as heartbeat. For the first time in many ages, he spoke not in vow nor in warning, but in reflection. Perhaps this is what I was always meant to be, not terror, not saviour, but witness, so none may forget. The wind stirred, rustling the branches. From the leaves came a soft answer, Mirko's voice woven through. "You are not alone." The Leshy closed his eyes, a quiet peace settling within. He had walked centuries weighed by solitude, but now he understood. Guardianship was never his burden alone. It was shared between him, the boy rooted in memory, the villagers who spoke their names, the forest that breathed and sang. And so the story of the Leshy was not fixed as monster nor saint, but as something truer, something deeper, a being of balance, both feared and revered, both shadow and light. He was what the people remembered him to be, and because they remembered, he endured. The night passed into dawn, the horizon glowing pale. The Leshy stepped back into the forest, his form dissolving into shadow and mist. Behind him the great tree shimmered, leaves whispering with memory, roots holding fast against the silence that would always wait at the world's edge. The villagers would wake, and they would speak their names, and they would tell their children of the boy, the tree and the guardian who walked unseen among them. And so the tale closed not in ending, but in continuance. For memory is the only true shield, and as long as it is spoken, neither monster nor silence can claim the final word. The Leshy remained, not curse, not legend alone, but guardian eternal, watching over forest and man, carrying the fragile flame of remembrance into every age that would follow.